Detective Stephen LaCroix is called to a brutal crime scene in the quiet suburb of Lamarck, Houston, in Texas.
I was notified that there was a shooting in the Painted Meadows subdivision in our city, and one of the officers that responded said that her and a neighbor were providing CPR at the time they arrived. It was an extreme level of danger on the way to the scene.
As Detective LaCroix pulls up, he's met with chaos outside the victim's home.
We knew that we had a victim that was shot. We knew that we had a gunman that was on the loose and still armed. We didn't know which direction he was going in or what his motive from that point on was. Lamarck EMS is on scene, and I'm told that the victim is in the back of the ambulance and they were getting ready to transport her to the hospital.
The victim, identified as 30-year-old mother of two Savannah Paschal, is clinging to life after suffering multiple gunshot wounds.
We hope Savannah pulls through from that point in time, and I don't want to speculate anything from that point because you still got to remain strong in the face of the family that's looking at fear.
At the scene, Savannah's mother, Shirley, points the finger. Her son-in-law, Trent.
Shirley, Savannah's mother, was outside in panic. She advised that Trent was in the house and that he had hid in the bathroom and came out, told Shirley and Savannah both that he was going to kill them. At that time, Shirley left or started to scream, run out the house, and she heard the shots fired. She didn't know at that time what had happened.
As police race to track down Trent Paschal, Shirley Kinchin rushes to the hospital, desperate to uncover her daughter's fate.
After some time, the doctor came in and said that she had passed, that they had done everything she could.
I was on the road, and I was about halfway home when she called me. So I pulled over, and she told me. I instantly got sick to my stomach.
I got a text. I was supposed to be with her that day. I got a text, and it wasn't real. And I didn't believe it.
While family and friends grapple with the shock, detectives intensify their hunt for Trent Paschal.
Different detectives were assigned different portions of the case. We were advised that the vehicle that he left the location in was the truck that Savannah had been driving. It was her grandfather's truck. It was actually in the name of her mother, Shirley, I believe. When we found that out, we were able to report the vehicle stolen. We were then advised that the vehicle had OnStar programming, which has the capabilities of tracking the vehicle. You just have to sit there and hope that the ones whose job that is doing everything they can to bring him back in and keep, it's not just the family safe, but everyone.
While one team of investigators hunts for Paschal, another digs deep into his relationship with Savannah, uncovering clues, collecting evidence, searching for a motive.
Savannah was beautiful. She was intelligent. She was caring and compassionate.
She was always the life of the party and out there, and anytime somebody new came around, she was the first one to run up to you and say, hey, I'm Savannah. And you didn't have a choice to meet her. She was gonna meet you no matter what.
Very fun and loving and happy and very outgoing.
We met when I was a freshman in high school, and we were both in band. She's the class clown, in a sense. To people who knew her, she was hilarious. You wanted to be around her.
Savannah had a very strong faith. She was very active in the church camps.
I was one who led her class when she decided she was ready to be baptized. And I lowered her into the water, raised her up. It was a spectacular day. But she was part of a group of kids that were high energy, interactive, lots of fun to be around.
She was more interested in the outcasts, the people that weren't as popular.
The underdogs.
Detectives uncover a surprising twist. Savannah's mother, a private investigator, has always been a fiercely protective force in her daughter's life.
Savannah did tease her other boyfriends that, you know, my mom's probably already run your license plate. Are you serious? You know, so she used to tease her boyfriends about it.
Detectives learn that Savannah's children are not both Trent's. Before meeting him, she'd been in a relationship during her college years.
She was dating a young man, and they seemed to be quite serious. And he had asked her to marry him, and they had actually bought a ring. But once she found out that she was pregnant, she told him, and he disappeared. He ghosted. He was gone. And we haven't seen him since.
I was surprised when I found out she was pregnant, but what I'll say for Savannah is she was sharp enough and mature enough to recognize what she had done and her responsibility, and chose to carry that baby and raise that baby.
She was scared, but she was excited to have a kid, and so we got her prepared.
She grew up almost overnight to be a mom.
As detectives investigate Savannah's vulnerability during this time and look to rule out other potential suspects, it becomes clear that Savannah had enthusiastically embraced a career. She was becoming an independent high achiever.
She wanted to go into nursing because she wanted to care for people and take care of people and make them better. But she couldn't stand to see them suffer and die. So when she finally became aware that she was interested in the mortuary sciences, she said this was the ultimate for her because the people are already dead. If she could ease the pain or suffering of some people when they've lost their loved one, she says, I found what I need to do.
And she got her job here with the funeral home.
We're here to help people in their toughest days. And that's what Savannah did, making sure that every single thing is perfect. From the way the flowers were set up in the chapel, to the register book, to that first impression when the family walks in, to the music being the right songs they selected. It was really about taking care of the families who walk through our doors to celebrate their life, but also to grieve.
Once she started working at the funeral home, she finally felt like she was doing what she wanted to do. Like she was finally on the path to happiness, like inner true happiness. And she found what she wanted to do and she loved it.
Finding contentment in her career and in motherhood, investigators uncover that it's around this time that Savannah meets Trent Paschal. It was in the local grocery store. He is 18 years her senior.
They seemed to hit it off pretty well. He seemed to treat her really well, and she reciprocated.
She loved the hell out of him.
A very polite Southern gentleman. Your first impression of Trent was this is a stand-up guy.
Funny, easygoing, loving, and very charming. He was easy on the eyes.
He also had that little touch of a bad boy, but he was grown up and was familiar with life, and I think that was comfortable for her.
He was very nice. You know, he presented himself nicely. So I did what I do. I got his license plate number and I ran it and did a background check because that's what I do. What I uncovered was He has a criminal history. It was mostly theft charges. At that time, he did have felony. I know of at least one because I remember telling Savannah, he is a felon. That's not someone that you want to, have a relationship with.
As detectives delve into Savannah and Trent's relationship, they uncover what seems to be the perfect match, until her mother reveals a criminal past of Trent Paschal. Despite this, Savannah remains convinced that he's a changed man.
He's cleaning up. He's promised me he's going straight. He's working, in construction. He's working as a subcontractor. He's making good money. He's working steady.
It's not long before Savannah and Trent Paschal take their relationship to the next level. It's in 2006 when Trent and Savannah marry, marking the start of a new chapter in their lives.
They were living together, and they had told us that she was pregnant and they were having a child. And then a few months later, they came back to us and told us that Trent was going to be going to jail.
By 2008, Trent was charged with theft.
We're flabbergasted. What's going on? And of course, we were told this story. He didn't do it, but his attorney had advised him to take a plea deal because if he went to jury, they wouldn't believe him because of his past record. And so he went to jail.
Theft of some computers.
And my first thought when they told us was that he wasn't going to be there when the baby was born.
That started putting stress on their relationship. And looking back, there were a lot of things she shared that I should have paid attention to.
Detectives probing Savannah Paschal's murder learn that on his imprisonment, she remains loyal to Trent.
She believed in him. She knew his true character. And, she felt that he deserved to be treated and dealt with as a normal human being, just like everybody else. And people make mistakes. And she was able to forgive him, so everybody else did too.
Trent's sentence is significant.
It was maybe 8 months or so after he got out.
It is on Trent's release that he and Savannah decide to settle to a new life in Lamarck in Texas, just a few miles away from Savannah's family.
Yeah, you don't make everything so I say too.
Exactly. She seemed very truly happy. She had a daughter with him, and they seemed to be carrying on their lives.
He was subcontracting again, but he was working for a business down in Galveston that rents out those electric scooters and electric mopeds and stuff, and he was repairing those. So it appeared that he was making money honestly.
It seemed like that they were, doing well.
Friends and family tell detectives, however, that just a few years into their marriage, Trent became resentful.
I think with the pandemic, it was a factor.
And that was one of the triggers, because he wasn't able to pull in as much money. Savannah, working in the funeral industry, she never stopped working. Her work actually increased.
During the pandemic, the amount of funerals increased, and there were a lot of days where Savannah would have to work nights. It's not an 8 to 5 job. There were many days you're here to 9 or 10 o'clock at night, making sure everything's perfect for the service the next day.
She was a team player. She said yes, and he just would get angry. He said, that's not what you agreed to.
She was not tending to his needs. He wanted her at home. because laundry had to be done. The kids had to be bathed. Food had to be made. The house had to be cleaned up. And she was going to school to get her final certifications as funeral director. He was stuck at the house with the kids while she was working and going to school. He did not like that.
As the pandemic propels Savannah's career to new heights and Trent's into a downward spiral, detectives learn of the growing tensions between them. Have those tensions given Trent Paschal some sort of motive?
The money started getting tight. She was paying for her school. She was also making her own money. And quite honestly, probably making more money than he was without a job. And I think that's where the jealousy started.
For investigators, Trent's mindset suggests a clear and escalating paranoia.
He was accusing her of having an affair. In his head, she's spending too much time away from home, so there has to be somebody else.
It progressively got worse.
He isolated her from everyone, all her friends.
Well, she wasn't allowed at my house. She wasn't allowed to talk to my cousin because he had flirted with her 8 years ago.
He became very controlling of her actions and where she was at all times.
He would be texting her constantly. Where are y'all at? When you gonna be home? You know.
What are you doing? Who are you with? Where are you?
Savannah Paschal's friends revealed to investigators that Trent's jealousy takes a dangerous turn.
One day we went to the nail shop, our usual place, mani-pedis, whatever, massages, and he went to Galveston, and I said, well, I'll be bringing her back as soon as we're done. He was back sitting in the parking lot blowing up her phone, waiting on her to come out.
She had GPS thing on her phone. So he was watching it to see where she was, even when she was moving around.
But the next thing that he did at their house was installed a security system with cameras on every corner.
He had multiple cameras, multiple angles. You could see the backyard, you could see the front yard, coming, going, up the street, down the street.
And it just kind of spiraled from there.
Paschal returns to his former criminal ways.
He had gotten into stealing. Savannah knew, and I don't know how she found out about it. She just said that something popped up. And I was like, what do you mean something popped up? And she said, on Trent's record. And I'm like, what do you mean? And she said, he got arrested, he stole a car.
Well, it turned out that he was stealing cars and selling them and getting money for it.
At that point, she decided that it was enough. She told him, I can't live like this anymore. You aren't going to put our family through this.
Me and the kids are not going to live like this. We're not going to raise our children in a criminal environment.
And he did not like that.
While investigating the growing tension between Savannah and Trent Paschal, detectives learned from friends that Savannah drew the line when Trent began committing offenses, refusing to support him any further.
She was ready to leave. She had spoken to Mike and Shirley, and she said, I'm gonna do this now. And I told her, okay, well, let's do it.
And what they tell you not to do when you're getting out of a domestic abuse situation is to let the person know that you're planning on leaving.
On October 21st, Paschal records a video.
I knew she was kind of too young, but she's been playing me for a fool. I told her not to mess with me, not to mess with my emotions. Don't play with me.
Detectives learn that he and Savannah have been arguing that day.
She called me and said, "Mom, it's really bad. It's really bad. I need you to come." Apparently Trent confronted her about having an affair. She, said she didn't. And he said he had a gun with a bullet for her.
I put everything into this relationship. I have done nothing to your mom.
I told her not to go in the house. I said, "I'm on my way." When I got to the house, her and Trent were in the yard arguing.
And the police were called.
And pull up. They separated them. They said, "Well, what we can do is we can ask him to leave, pack a bag and leave, for 24 hours till everybody calms down." And so that's what they did. She says, "I need to call the school about the kids." She said, "Because when we fought before, when he went and got the kids out of school and didn't tell me." And so she called the school. They said she had to come to the school and sign some papers, basically, so if he showed up, they would notify her. So her and I left to go to the school, and we drove back to the house. My car was in the driveway.
Savannah had given me a call, and she was trying to give me a lowdown on what was going on, that Trent was angry and, that her mom was there. And she was gonna go inside to get ready for work. And we hung up.
We went in the house, and she directly went to the video camera, the screen. And I asked her, I said, "What are you doing?" And she says, "I'm looking to see if he came back." And we had planned that she was gonna go back to work and that I was gonna go and take care of business and meet back at her house. And I said, "Okay." I said, "Well, I'm gonna go to the restroom." And I walked into the restroom.
Shirley said he was hiding in the shower or the tub and ambushed them both.
He pulled back the curtain and kind of stepped out, pointed the gun at me, and said, "I'm going to kill you both." Well, when he stepped out, he was right here. So I just pushed the door and with all my might, and he pushed him out. And then we were fighting. I was pushing, he was pushing. And I was just screaming at him to stop, stop, please stop. And all of a sudden it got quiet. And then I heard Savannah scream and I heard a gunshot.
Where do you think you're going?
At that time, Shirley left or started to scream, run out the house, and she heard the shots fired. She ran to the neighbor's house to get help.
And I ran 2 doors down where a state trooper lived, and I just started beating on the door, yelling, "Help, help, he shot her, he shot her." He answered the door. He had his weapon, and he stepped around the corner. And as he stepped around the corner, we saw and heard Trent peel out down the street in the truck. And of course, they called 911.
While one team of detectives have pieced together facts around the shooting, another has launched a manhunt to track down Trent Paschal. As he flees, Savannah's friends and family are forced into lockdown, fearing what he might do next.
We didn't know where Trent was. I immediately thought that Trent could be coming to our house. I was scared out of my mind.
We went on complete lockdown. We locked our doors because we didn't know if he was coming here. We didn't know what his mission was.
I asked him to call me, and he said, "I can't right now." And his response was, "Is she dead?" And I said, "Trent, for the love of the kids, turn yourself in." He cut me off at that point. He didn't say nothing else. Wouldn't answer the phone when I called.
While Paschal ignores some calls, he does connect with one person.
We were alerted by a family member was Sharon Glenn, the Savannah's aunt. She said that Trent called her.
She was on the phone with him, and I do know that she had the wherewithal to start recording the conversation.
He stated in that phone call that he had killed Savannah. And I would say it was our smoking gun in this case.
Investigators then make a chilling discovery of the video that he recorded just minutes before shooting Savannah. He'd posted it on YouTube.
I'm recording this because I want my daughter to know that I love you, Paschal. I'm so sorry that I've done this. I want you to know that you mean everything to me. And I love you too. I love you so much. I love you like you're my own. I didn't choose this. Your mom chose this. She's been cheating on me for a long time.
The YouTube video Paschal has made, confessing to the murder of his wife, is shared amongst family and friends.
I pulled it up and watched it. It was like the life just poured out of me. I saw Trent, who I knew absolutely to my core was Trent, telling that he had to do what he had to do because Savannah had brought it on herself. And it was just devastating.
I told her not to mess with me, not to mess with my emotions. I got an audio where she was calling a guy yesterday, and she started talking about a dream and everything, and she had with him too about sex. I haven't done anything wrong. I'm like, why me? My hair's a mess and I look horrible. Oh, sorry. Take these off. I'm so sorry. I don't have better words right now. I'm hurting so bad.
When he was making the video, he was sitting in the living room and he was looking to see when the vehicle drove into the driveway. And from that time when the vehicle drove in, that's when he got up, ran to the restroom. Well, Savannah was on a phone call in the truck that lasted for about 12 minutes. And so he hid in the bathroom for 12 minutes.
As the manhunt intensifies, Detective LaCroix gets a crucial lead from the vehicle that Trent used to flee the crime.
The truck that he left in was my father's truck. It had OnStar, and they could find out where the truck was and shut it off, remotely.
Police track Paschal's getaway vehicle to a Walmart 40 miles away.
So apparently this vehicle was involved in a murder in Lamar.
You looked at it?
I looked inside, I didn't touch anything.
72 and 26 go north. Suspect is a known suspect.
At that time, it's my understanding that Harris County Sheriff's deputies initiated a traffic stop on that vehicle, and Trent exited the vehicle with a firearm in hand and pointed it at the officers.
Stop! Let me see your hands!
It made it clear and evident that he had no intentions of trying to be served justice in jail.
He did pull the gun on the Harris County Sheriffs, and they shot him.
Police are forced to open fire as they move in to arrest Trent Paschal.
Stop! Let me see your hands!
He was struck multiple times or had multiple wounds from the gunshots.
Lay on your stomach and put your hands out!
He survived the shooting.
He almost got me, bro.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
You got it, Ryan? Okay, let's go. All right, Trent. What happened, man?
My wife was chasing me. I shot her.
Okay.
And I ran out of bullets, so I tried to shoot myself, and I ran out of bullets.
He's been charged with first-degree premeditated murder, assault, and felony possession of a gun.
He was essentially brought to justice, but ultimately bonded out.
While awaiting trial, Trent is placed on house arrest and ordered to wear an ankle monitor. But he's free.
It's disappointing. You expect to have someone who acted in malice and had no regard for his wife, the mother of his children's life, and here he is able to be free and live. The family kept in touch with me often. They say, we're scared, we don't know where he's at. We have his children, their grandchildren, and we don't know what his intentions are of, seeing them or getting them back.
On April 13th, 2021, 6 months after Savannah's murder, her family's worst fears come true when Paschal skips bail in a violent and dramatic escape.
He went to Harris County and he went to a car dealership and test drove a SUV. And when they stopped to get gas for it, he pulled a knife on the employee, the salesman, and told him to get out of the vehicle, and he took off.
And that's when a warrant was issued for his arrest by the U.S. Marshals.
At that point, he's committed an aggravated robbery. The bonds were revoked, and the warrants were assigned. At that point, the chase is on. I think everyone was scared of him. I don't think anyone was immune from feeling that at this time that they weren't gonna be next. He's done snapped, went off, and now who's next?
We always were watching our backs, constantly.
I'm getting phone calls from everybody. Trent's been spotted in Galveston. We jump in the car and we head to Galveston. We check everything there, nothing. A day later, we get a call. He's in Los Angeles, California. We get people out there. We confirm that's not him. We're constantly everywhere. Anytime that something comes up, we're on it. We thought that he was at the Mexico border. We packed up, jumped in our cars, we headed down there. It just turned out that wasn't it. So again, we went back to our drawing board, we erased it, and we started over.
As Marshal Hunt chases down every possible lead, Paschal's ability to evade capture only prolongs the heartache for Savannah's grieving family.
He was in custody 3 separate times after assaulting Shirley and killing our daughter. Behind bars 3 times and legally bonded out, with them knowing that he was up on murder charges, assault charges on her, assault on a police officer, felony possession of a gun, had fled the scene, crossed county lines, and they saw fit to bond him out and legally release him 3 separate times.
Paschal remains on the run for 8 months until a shocking phone call to police in Texas.
It's late, and a lady says to me, she says, I'm from Texas. I'm getting cold chills thinking about the phone call because she says, I have been dating.
8 months into a nationwide manhunt for Trent Paschal, wanted for the murder of his wife Savannah, U.S. Marshals receive an unexpected tip from a woman claiming to be in a romantic relationship with Trent Paschal.
We met at the schoolie swarm, which was in Missouri. Just kind of magnetized to each other pretty easily. I've been hanging with him for a while and I don't get any red flags. He's charming. Super charming, and he's pretty laid back and chilled, just cruising along with life like I am.
He was going by a different name and gotten into a hippie, gypsy kind of movement where everybody lived in vans and lived in older RVs and they kind of just were free-spirited and just traveled together. He's just going on with his life. Nobody asked questions.
He told me that he's from California, that his ex-wife had cheated on him. 2 years ago, they had broken up. So he was always staying in his SUV. So he just learned that he really liked the nomadic life, and that's how he got into the nomadic living.
And so this young lady had no idea who he was and tells me that her RV had broke down and that she was sleeping in Trent's van, which was stolen.
For months, Paschal hides in plain sight under the alias Trevor, living with Catherine at a recreation vehicle resort in Ocala, Florida.
He has a shower bag that he completely keeps beside him when he drives. It's like right there. And he always has a gun in it. And in Texas, especially, that's normal to have guns. Like, it's not abnormal. And I looked in it to see if the gun was there to make sure, I put it away so the kids don't get to it. Then I see his Texas driver's license, and right behind it was a food stamp card that had his name on it also, the Trent Paschal. So I was like, who the hell is this? And then I was like, I'm gonna just search him on just the web, see what pops up. And he popped up everywhere. And the first thing I saw was U.S. Marshals and his photo. And I started finding out more information about murdered wife and about the video that he had put on YouTube. I came across Savannah's memorial page on Facebook. And I was like, oh my gosh. I was super scared that he would know that I knew.
The wanted poster had my number on it, and so she had called me. That was like, wow, she was there with this guy, but it all unfolded just so quick.
Seemingly at ease with his new love and life, has Paschal made a killer's mistake? Deputies from the Marion County Sheriff's Office rushed to his location, determined to take Paschal into custody.
Trent, this is the Marion County Sheriff's Office. We can work this out. I just need you to come out of the sliding door on the passenger side of the vehicle, showing us your hands.
It was New Year's Eve night at midnight, so there was a lot of fireworks going off at the time. And there was a marshal who was with us in the cop car. And I overheard everything going on the dispatch, on his uniform. And all of a sudden I heard a pop, and it didn't sound like fireworks.
Sound like you heard gunshots? One gunshot and then him falling.
Where's Kaner?
Right over there. Yep, there's a gun right there. See it? Yeah, he's definitely gone. Follow.
So I received the call, it's around 2:30 in the morning, that Trent had shot himself in Florida after deputies from the area that he was in tried to make contact with him. I was a little in shock at that time.
Lima 3379 26.
He's 1012.
My phone buzzes, zzz, zzz, and it was the detective in Lamarck. And it just says, we got him. Oh my God, and Shirley's going, what? And I said, Detective LaCroix says, they've got him. I said, you got him, where is he? Well, he's in the morgue. I said, what? What happened? She said, he killed himself.
A lot of things are going through my mind at this time. I'm like, that's not the ending that we wanted. But the first thing that came to my mind is that the family has some sort of closure. The family will go to bed that night, will be able to sleep in peace, that they are not in harm's way anymore.
I wanted him to have justice. I wanted him to face her parents in court and spend his life in prison. But then I'm grateful that her parents and her family don't have to go through trial in court because he was in prison before and got out. And so who would have said that he wouldn't get out again?
Not having her here every day, it's a struggle. She was my best friend. We talked almost every day. We hung out at least once a week. I lost my mom about a year before I lost Savannah, and Savannah completely got me through that. So losing Savannah, it was my second best friend. I felt alone. He took my best friend from me.
I would hope that anyone who is in a relationship with someone who is controlling and restricting realize where they are and get out of there. We have to, all of us, work better to provide safe exit pathways for people who are in those relationships.
We want people to know that there are resources for them. And it doesn't have to, get as bad because, she waited. She thought she could handle it, and it cost her her life.
Investigators pieced together what finally exposed the killer. His ultimate mistake, leaving behind a bath bag, which revealed his deceit.
She was from Texas, and that she knew what a Texas ID looked like and knew it was legitimate.
She digs through the bag and she's able to Google and pops up all the news channels.
His new identity was fake, and his carelessness in leaving behind the bath bag ultimately proved to be a killer's mistake.
In the vastness of the Pacific Ocean, there are places so remote that they seem disconnected from the rest of the world. Tiny stretches of coral and sand rise only slightly above the surface of the sea, surrounded by thousands of miles of open water. They exist in silence, visited by few people and remembered by even fewer. It was in one of these isolated places, nearly 10 years after 5 men disappeared from Hawaii, that a discovery would reignite one of the most enduring maritime mysteries in the history of the islands. The story did not begin with a crime scene. There were no signs of violence, no identified offender, and no courtroom battle that would eventually reveal the truth. Instead, it began with absence. 5 men left home on a routine fishing trip and never returned. For years, their families waited for answers that never came. Search teams scoured the ocean. Investigators reviewed the facts. Friends and relatives held on to hope. Yet the Pacific remained silent. Then, almost a decade later, something unexpected emerged from that silence. In September 1988, marine biologist John Naughton was conducting survey work on a remote atoll in the Marshall Islands. The location was far from Hawaii, separated by more than 2,000 miles of ocean. It was not a place where anyone expected to find evidence connected to a disappearance that had occurred years earlier. Yet among the isolated landscape, Naughton encountered something unusual. There was a wrecked boat. At first glance, it may have appeared to be just another abandoned vessel left behind by time, weather, and the relentless force of the sea. Across the Pacific, boats are occasionally lost, damaged, or carried by currents into places no one expects. But when the registration information was examined, the significance of the discovery became clear. The vessel was Sarah Jo. For nearly 10 years, that name had been associated with one of Hawaii's greatest mysteries. The Sarah Jo had vanished in February 1979 during what should have been a routine fishing excursion. 5 experienced men from the community of Hana on Maui had departed that morning expecting to spend time on the water and return home later the same day. Instead, they disappeared into the Pacific without a trace. Now, almost a decade later, the boat itself had been found. The discovery immediately raised questions. How had a 17-foot Boston whaler traveled such an extraordinary distance across the ocean? What route had it taken? How long had it drifted? And perhaps most importantly, what had happened to the 5 men who had been aboard? The answers were not waiting inside the wreck. In fact, The discovery of the vessel would lead investigators and observers to an even deeper mystery. Not far from the wrecked boat, there was something else.
A grave.
It was not a random scattering of bones exposed by weather or hidden among debris washed ashore by storms. It appeared intentional. The grave had been marked with a cross fashioned from driftwood. Coral stones covered the burial site. Someone, at some point, had taken the time to bury a human being there. The discovery transformed an already remarkable case into something even more puzzling. When forensic specialists examined the remains and compared them with available records, they made a significant identification. Through dental records, the remains were determined to belong to Scott Mormon, one of the 5 men who had disappeared aboard the Sarah Joe. For the first time in nearly 10 years, one piece of the mystery had been answered. One of the missing men had been found. Yet the answer immediately created new questions. If Scott Mormon had reached this isolated atoll, how had he gotten there? Had he survived the original disappearance? Had he arrived alone? Had another member of the group reached the island with him? Most disturbing of all, who had buried him? The grave suggested human involvement. The coral covering and driftwood cross indicated purpose and intention. Someone had arranged that burial, but no one knew who. The discovery did not simply revive interest in the disappearance. It fundamentally changed how people thought about it. For nearly a decade, the prevailing image of the Sarah Joe mystery had been simple in its tragedy. 5 men had gone out onto the ocean. A storm had developed. The boat had vanished. Somewhere in the Pacific, the vessel and its passengers had been lost. The discovery of the boat complicated that narrative. The Sarah Joe had not disappeared forever. It had survived long enough to travel more than 2,000 miles from Hawaii. And somehow, at least one of the men connected to it had ended up buried on a remote atoll. The 4 remaining men were nowhere to be found. There were no confirmed remains belonging to Ralph Maliakini, none belonging to Benjamin Kalama, none belonging to Patrick Wessner, none belonging to Peter Hanchett. No personal belongings linked conclusively to them were recovered from the site. No evidence explained their final moments. No records documented their fate. They remained missing, just as they had been since February 1979. As investigators, journalists, and family members examined the strange developments surrounding the case, a series of unanswered questions emerged that continue to define the mystery today. Could a small fishing boat truly drift across such a vast stretch of the Pacific Ocean? Experts believed it was physically possible. Ocean currents and prevailing winds could carry vessels across extraordinary distances. Yet understanding that something was possible did not make it any less astonishing. The journey from Hawaii to the Marshall Islands represented thousands of miles of open water, storms, currents, and years of exposure to the elements. Then there was the question of survival. If the boat had drifted, how long had the men remained aboard? Had any of them survived for an extended period after losing contact? Had one or more reached land? The discovery of Scott Mormon's remains suggested that at least part of the story may have continued beyond the initial disappearance. But without additional evidence, certainty remained impossible. The grave itself remained perhaps the most haunting element of all. A grave tells a story of human action. Someone dug it. Someone placed the remains there. Someone arranged the coral stones. Someone erected the cross. Whether that person was another survivor, a passing fisherman, or someone else entirely remained unknown. No evidence could answer the question. And so the grave stood as both a clue and a mystery. The Sarah Joe case occupies a unique place among unsolved disappearances because it offers fragments of an answer without providing a conclusion. The boat was found. One man was identified. A burial site existed. Yet none of these discoveries explained the central event. What happened on February 11, 1979? What sequence of events transformed a routine fishing trip into a mystery that would endure for decades? The Pacific Ocean has long inspired stories of exploration, survival, and loss. Its immense size allows it to conceal answers in ways few other environments can. Storms erase evidence. Currents scatter debris. Time gradually removes traces of human presence. In many disappearances at sea, the ocean leaves nothing behind. The Sarah Jo case was different. The ocean eventually returned something. It returned the boat. It returned one of the missing men. But what it returned only deepened the mystery. The discovery in 1988 did not close the case. It reopened it. Nearly 10 years after 5 friends left Hannah for what should have been an ordinary day of fishing, investigators were forced to confront a reality more complex than anyone had imagined. The answers they had hoped to find remained elusive. Instead, they found new questions waiting for them on a lonely atoll thousands of miles from home. Those questions remain unanswered today. To understand how this mystery began, we must return to the morning of February 11, 1979, when 5 experienced men climbed aboard a small vessel named Sarah Jo and headed out into the waters off Maui, unaware that their journey would become one of Hawaii's most enduring maritime enigmas. Long before the Sarah Jo became one of Hawaii's most enduring mysteries, it was simply a small fishing boat owned and used by people who knew the ocean well. The story that would later attract investigators, journalists, maritime experts, and curious observers across decades did not begin as an extraordinary event. It began as an ordinary day among friends. To understand why the disappearance remains so haunting, it is important to begin not with the mystery itself, but with the men at the center of it. On February 11, 1979, 5 men from the town of Hana on the island of Maui set out together on a fishing trip. The group consisted of Ralph Maliakini, age 27, Scott Mormon, age 27, Benjamin Kalama, age 38, Patrick Wessner, age 26, and Peter Hanchett, age 31. Although their individual life stories are not extensively documented in the available records of the case, certain facts are clear. They were not strangers brought together by chance. They knew one another through the local community. They were experienced around the ocean. They were familiar with boats, fishing, and the conditions that came with spending time on Hawaiian waters. That detail matters because it shapes how investigators and observers later viewed the disappearance. The men aboard the Sarah Jo were not inexperienced tourists making reckless decisions in unfamiliar territory. They were individuals who understood the environment around them. They lived in a part of Hawaii where the ocean was a constant presence. The sea was woven into daily life, recreation, transportation, and local culture. Hana itself occupies a distinctive place on Maui. Situated on the island's eastern side, it is known for its relative isolation compared with more heavily populated areas. The community has long maintained a strong local identity. In such places, relationships often stretch across years, sometimes generations. People know one another. Families know one another. News travels quickly, and events affecting one resident often affect many others. When 5 members of such a community disappear together, the impact extends far beyond immediate relatives. The loss becomes communal. On the morning of February 11th, however, there was no indication that anything unusual was about to occur. The trip appeared routine. The men planned to spend time fishing. The boat they chose was familiar. The weather, at least during the morning hours, appeared favorable. Nothing in the available information suggests concern, hesitation, or warning signs before departure. At the center of the trip was the vessel itself. The boat was a 17-foot Boston whaler named Sarah Jo. The name carried personal significance. It had been created from the names of the owner's parents, Sarah and Joe. Like many privately owned boats, it was more than a collection of fiberglass, metal, and machinery. It possessed an identity recognized by those who knew it. Years later, that name would become famous because of the mystery attached to it. On that morning, however, it was simply the vessel chosen for a day on the water. The size of the boat is one of the details that continues to attract attention when the case is discussed. At 17 feet long, the Sarah Jo was not a large vessel. It was suitable for fishing excursions and local use, but hardly the type of craft one would associate with transoceanic travel. No one boarding the boat that morning could have imagined that it would one day be discovered more than 2,000 miles away on a remote atoll in the Marshall Islands. Yet that future was still hidden beyond the horizon. At the moment of departure, There was only the expectation of a normal day. The 5 men represented different ages and backgrounds, yet they shared one important characteristic. They were all comfortable enough with the ocean to willingly spend time on it together. That familiarity likely contributed to the ordinary nature of the trip. Fishing outings were not extraordinary events requiring special preparation or concern. For people accustomed to the sea, such trips formed part of normal life. The ocean was not viewed solely as a place of danger. It was also a place of work, recreation, and tradition. This context helps explain why the departure of the Sarah Joe initially attracted little attention. Nothing about the plan appeared unusual. Nothing suggested impending disaster. Nothing indicated that the boat would soon vanish. Looking back from the perspective of decades later, it is tempting to search for clues hidden within those final known hours before departure. People often examine unsolved mysteries hoping to find overlooked warnings or signs that might explain what happened. In the Sarah Joe case, however, the available facts offer no such clues. There are no documented arguments among the men. No reports of concern regarding the vessel. No evidence that anyone anticipated trouble. No indication that family members believed they were saying goodbye for the last time. Instead, the available information paints a picture of normalcy. 5 friends. 1 boat. A fishing trip. A clear morning. The simplicity of those facts is part of what makes the story so powerful. Many mysteries begin with unusual circumstances. The Sarah Joe mystery begins with circumstances that appear entirely ordinary. The men who boarded the vessel were not embarking on a dangerous expedition into unknown waters. They were participating in an activity that fit naturally within their experience and environment. This reality has shaped public fascination with the case for decades. The disappearance feels unsettling precisely because it happened to people who seemed well prepared for the setting in which they found themselves. The ocean, however, possesses a unique ability to alter expectations. Conditions can change. Distances can deceive. Events can unfold rapidly. Even experienced individuals may find themselves confronting circumstances beyond their control. Yet, at this stage of the story, none of those possibilities were visible. The morning remained calm. The destination remained ordinary. The future remained unknown. Among the 5 men was Scott Mormon, whose name would later become central to the mystery after the discovery of human remains on a distant atoll nearly 10 years later. At the time, however, he was simply one member of the group. The same was true for Ralph Maliakini, Benjamin Kalama, Patrick Wessner, and Peter Hanchett. They were not yet missing persons. They were not yet subjects of investigative reports. They were not yet part of one of Hawaii's most discussed maritime disappearances. They were simply men preparing to spend time at sea. The years that followed would transform their names into symbols of unanswered questions. Families would wait for information. Search teams would cover enormous stretches of ocean. Investigators would analyze limited evidence. Experts would debate theories. Writers would revisit the case again and again. But all of that belonged to the future. On the morning of February 11th, 1979, none of those developments existed. The mystery had not begun. The disappearance had not occurred. The Sarah Joe remained just a small fishing boat tied to a routine outing among friends. That image is important because it reminds us of what was truly lost. The story is often remembered because of the wreck discovered thousands of miles away. It is remembered because of the mysterious grave. It is remembered because of the unanswered questions that continue to surround the case. Yet before any of those elements emerged, there were 5 living men with plans for the day ahead. There was a community that expected to see them return. There were families who had no reason to believe anything was wrong. There was a boat preparing to leave shore beneath calm skies. The ordinary nature of that moment would later stand in sharp contrast to everything that followed. Because within a matter of hours, conditions would begin to change. The calm waters surrounding Maui would not remain calm. The routine fishing trip would not remain routine. And the Sarah Joe would begin a journey that, nearly half a century later, still has no complete explanation. The next chapter of the mystery would unfold not through human intention, but through the sudden arrival of forces far beyond anyone's control. On a morning that began in peace, the Pacific Ocean was preparing to reveal how quickly certainty can disappear. The mystery of the Sarah Jo is often remembered through the lens of what happened afterward. People remember the discovery of the wrecked boat in the Marshall Islands. They remember the lonely grave found nearby. They remember the unanswered questions that have persisted for decades. Yet all of those developments belong to the future. On the morning of February 11th, 1979, the story was still ordinary. The day began under conditions that gave no obvious warning of what would come. The waters around Maui appeared calm. The skies were clear. There were no immediate signs of danger. For 5 men planning a fishing trip, the morning offered every reason to believe the day would proceed normally. At approximately 10 a.m., the Sarah Jo departed from Hannah. Aboard were Ralph Maliakini, Scott Mormon, Benjamin Kalama, Patrick Wessner, and Peter Hanchett. Each man brought experience with the ocean. They were familiar with local waters and accustomed to spending time at sea. Nothing in the available information suggests that anyone viewed the trip as unusually risky. It was a routine outing among friends who knew both the vessel and the environment. The Sarah Jo itself was a relatively small Boston whaler, measuring approximately 17 feet in length. It was suitable for local fishing excursions and had likely represented a familiar presence to those aboard. At the time of departure, there was no indication that the vessel would soon become the center of one of Hawaii's most enduring mysteries. The boat moved away from shore. The coastline gradually receded. Life in Hannah continued. For those left behind, there was every expectation that the men would eventually return. Hours passed. Somewhere offshore, the group continued their fishing trip. Exactly where they traveled during those hours is not detailed in the available records. What is known is that conditions remained favorable during the morning. The ocean did not immediately reveal the danger that was approaching. Then the weather changed. The transformation appears to have occurred rapidly. By early afternoon, a powerful storm began developing around Maui. What had started as a calm and inviting day became something entirely different. The winds increased. The sea grew rough. Conditions deteriorated with remarkable speed. Storms at sea possess a unique ability to alter circumstances in a matter of hours. Water that appears manageable can become dangerous. Distances that seem short can suddenly feel enormous. A vessel that performs well in calm conditions may face entirely different challenges once weather begins to intensify. The available information does not provide a detailed timeline of the storm's development, but it makes clear that the change was dramatic enough to alarm people on shore. As the weather worsened, concern began to grow. The Sarah Jo was still at sea. The men aboard were now facing conditions very different from those that had existed when they left Hannah earlier that morning. At some point during the developing storm, communication was established. This communication would later become one of the most significant pieces of information in the entire case. According to later reports, the final transmission from the Sarah Jo indicated that the boat's engine was experiencing problems. That detail is crucial. Bad weather alone can create dangerous circumstances. A storm combined with mechanical failure creates an entirely different level of risk. For a small vessel operating in deteriorating conditions, the loss of reliable engine performance can dramatically reduce options. Maneuverability becomes limited. Navigation becomes more difficult. The ability to respond to changing seas becomes compromised. The available evidence does not specify the exact nature of the mechanical problem. It does not explain when the issue began or how severe it was at the moment of the transmission. It simply establishes that engine trouble existed. That message was the last known communication from the Sarah Jo. Afterward, silence. No additional radio transmissions were received. No confirmed distress calls followed. No verified updates arrived. Contact ended. For investigators looking back years later, that final report became one of the last fixed points in an otherwise uncertain timeline. The men had departed under calm conditions. A storm had developed. The engine had encountered problems. Then communication ceased. Everything after that remains unknown. This gap in knowledge forms the heart of the mystery. Without direct witnesses, Investigators could not reconstruct the final hours aboard the vessel with certainty. No survivor returned to describe events. No detailed records documented what happened next. The ocean concealed whatever followed. As weather conditions continued to worsen, concern naturally increased among people waiting for the boat's return. Fishing trips have expected rhythms. People depart. People spend time at sea. People return home. When those patterns are interrupted, worry begins to emerge. The Sarah Jo did not return as expected. The worsening weather made that absence more alarming. A vessel experiencing engine trouble during a major storm represented a serious concern. Family members, friends, and members of the local community would soon find themselves facing uncertainty that grew with each passing hour. At that stage, however, no one knew the full scope of what had occurred. A delayed return might still have an explanation. Communication equipment can fail. Weather can disrupt schedules. Boats can experience difficulties and still make it back safely. Hope remained. Yet as time passed, hope increasingly collided with reality. The Sarah Jo was missing. The 5 men aboard were missing. And there was no information explaining where they were. The transition from concern to alarm did not happen instantly. It developed gradually as expected timelines passed without contact. Each hour that produced no communication increased uncertainty. Meanwhile, somewhere beyond sight of shore, the fate of the Sarah Jo was unfolding. The ocean offers little opportunity for observation once a vessel disappears beyond the horizon. Unlike events that occur on land, there are often no witnesses. Distances are vast. Weather can erase evidence almost immediately. Even modern technology struggles to monitor every movement across open water. In 1979, those limitations were even more significant. As a result, investigators would later be forced to work backward from a handful of known facts. They knew the men departed around 10 a.m. They knew conditions were favorable during the morning. They knew a severe storm developed later in the day. They knew the vessel reported engine trouble. They knew communication ended afterward. Beyond those points, certainty largely disappears. This absence of information is one reason the Sarah Jo case has remained so compelling. Many mysteries contain conflicting accounts, disputed testimony, or competing evidence. The Sarah Jo mystery contains something different. A void. A period of time during which no one knows exactly what occurred. The storm itself has often been viewed as a central element of the case. It provides a plausible explanation for why the vessel encountered danger. It explains why experienced men might suddenly find themselves in difficulty. It helps account for the disappearance. Yet even the storm does not answer every question. It does not explain how the boat eventually reached the Marshall Islands. It does not explain the grave discovered nearly 10 years later. It does not explain the fate of 4 of the 5 men. Those questions remained hidden within the future. On February 11, 1979, however, none of those mysteries had yet emerged. There was only a storm, a boat experiencing mechanical trouble, 5 men at sea, and a final communication that marked the last confirmed contact anyone would ever have with the Sarah Jo. As daylight faded and the vessel failed to return, uncertainty spread through the community. What had begun as a routine fishing trip was becoming something far more serious. The calm morning had vanished. The predictable day had disappeared. The Sarah Jo was no longer simply late. It was missing. And in the hours ahead, one of the largest search efforts connected to a small fishing vessel in Hawaii would begin, as rescuers raced against time and the vastness of the Pacific Ocean in an attempt to find 5 men who had seemingly vanished without a trace. As February 11, 1979 progressed and the weather around Maui continued to deteriorate, concern gradually turned into alarm. The Sarah Jo had not returned. The final known communication from the vessel had reported engine trouble. After that message, all contact ended. For the families waiting at home, the uncertainty must have been immediate and unsettling. A fishing trip that had begun beneath calm skies was no longer following the expected course. At first, there may have been hope that the boat had simply been delayed. Weather can alter schedules. Mechanical problems can slow a vessel's return. Radio communication can fail. The ocean is full of variables that can interrupt plans without leading to disaster. Yet as more time passed and no additional communication arrived, the situation became increasingly serious. The 5 men aboard the Sarah Jo were experienced. They were familiar with the ocean and with local conditions. The fact that no one had heard from them after the report of engine trouble suggested that something significant had happened. The worsening storm only amplified those fears. Once it became clear that the vessel was missing, authorities began organizing a search effort. What followed was a large-scale operation involving multiple organizations and resources. The objective was straightforward: locate the Sarah Jo and bring its passengers home. The challenge, however, was immense. The Pacific Ocean is one of the largest and most unforgiving environments on Earth. Even a relatively small search area can contain vast expanses of water. Weather conditions can complicate visibility. Currents can move vessels away from their last known positions. Every hour that passes can dramatically expand the possible locations where a missing boat might be found. Despite those obstacles, an extensive search operation was launched. The United States Coast Guard became involved. The United States Marines participated. The Civil Air Patrol joined the effort. Fishing vessels assisted. Private boats contributed. Aircraft searched from above. Together, these resources examined enormous areas of ocean in hopes of finding evidence of the missing vessel. The scale of the operation reflected both the seriousness of the disappearance and the urgency of the situation. 5 men were missing. Their exact location was unknown. Time mattered. Search efforts at sea often rely upon a combination of known facts and calculated assumptions. Investigators attempt to determine where a vessel was last known to be located. They analyze weather conditions. They consider ocean currents and wind patterns. They estimate possible drift paths. Every available piece of information helps create a search strategy. In the case of the Sarah Jo, however, investigators faced significant limitations from the beginning. The final communication established that the vessel had engine problems. The storm had developed rapidly. Contact had ceased. Beyond those facts, little was known. Search crews scanned the ocean. Aircraft surveyed from above. Boats moved through designated areas. Rescue personnel looked for any sign that could explain what had happened. A floating vessel, a signal flare, a piece of debris, a life jacket, anything. Yet nothing appeared. Day after day, search teams continued their efforts. The ocean revealed no answers. No confirmed sightings of the Sarah Jo emerged. No survivors were located. No wreckage was found. No debris field identified the vessel's location. No radio transmissions broke the silence. For families waiting for news, each passing day likely brought a difficult emotional balance between hope and fear. As long as the boat remained missing, there was still the possibility that the men were alive somewhere beyond the search area. Yet every unsuccessful search reduced the likelihood of a positive outcome. One of the most painful aspects of maritime disappearances is the absence of certainty. In many tragedies, there comes a moment when events become clear. Evidence is found. A location is identified. Answers emerge. In the Sarah Jo case, that moment never arrived. The search operation expanded across a huge area of the Pacific. Thousands of square miles were examined. Resources from different organizations were coordinated toward a common objective. Still, nothing. The 5 men seemed to have vanished with it. The storm that had swept across Maui had already passed, but its consequences remained. Investigators understood that severe weather could complicate rescue efforts. A vessel disabled by engine trouble might drift unpredictably. Strong winds and heavy seas could separate people from a boat. Evidence that might normally be visible could be scattered across enormous distances. The ocean's ability to conceal information became painfully evident. Every search aircraft that returned without results deepened the mystery. Every boat that completed its assigned route without finding evidence increased uncertainty. Every day, without contact, raised new questions. Where was the Sarah Jo? Had the vessel sunk? Had it drifted beyond the search area? Were the men still alive? Had they reached another location? No one knew. For investigators, the absence of evidence created a difficult situation. They could not build a detailed reconstruction of events because there were too few confirmed facts. The timeline remained frustratingly simple. The boat departed Hannah at approximately 10 a.m. A storm developed. The engine experienced problems. Communication ended. The vessel disappeared. Beyond those points, there was little else to work with. Search operations continued for several days. The determination of those involved reflected the seriousness of the situation. Multiple organizations devoted personnel, equipment, and time to finding the missing men. Such efforts require coordination, planning, and considerable resources. Yet, even the most determined search cannot overcome every challenge posed by the open ocean. The Pacific remained silent. By February 16, 1979, 5 days after the disappearance, a difficult decision was made. The official search was suspended. From an operational perspective, the decision reflected the reality that extensive efforts had failed to locate the vessel or its passengers. Search teams had covered vast areas without success. No new information had emerged to direct resources toward a specific location. For the families, however, the suspension of the search represented something very different. It meant that organized rescue efforts were ending. It meant that no answers had been found. It meant that uncertainty would continue. Importantly, the suspension of the search did not mean that hope disappeared. Families often continue searching emotionally long after official operations conclude. They revisit possibilities. They wonder whether new evidence might emerge. They hold on to the belief that some explanation remains undiscovered. In the Sarah Jo case, those hopes would persist for years. At the time, however, no one could have imagined how unusual the eventual developments would become. The prevailing assumption might reasonably have been that the boat and its passengers had been lost somewhere within the Pacific. Without evidence to the contrary, that explanation appeared plausible. A storm had occurred. Mechanical problems had been reported. The vessel had vanished. Such tragedies, while devastating, are not unknown in maritime history. Yet the Sarah Jo would not remain a conventional disappearance. Unknown to everyone involved in the search, the mystery was only beginning. The lack of evidence created a void that would persist throughout the years that followed. Investigators had no wreck to examine. Families had no confirmed location to visit. The community had no explanation for what had happened. The story simply stopped. 5 men had gone fishing. A storm had arrived. The boat had disappeared. Then came silence. Months passed, then years. No significant breakthroughs emerged. No trace of the vessel appeared. No confirmed remains were recovered. No definitive answer surfaced. As time moved forward, the disappearance gradually transformed from an active search and rescue operation into one of Hawaii's enduring unsolved mysteries. The ocean had taken the Sarah Jo and refused to explain why. Yet beneath that apparent finality lay a future discovery that no investigator could have predicted. Nearly a decade later, on a remote atoll thousands of miles from Hawaii, the Pacific would finally return something. Not answers, not closure, but a clue so unexpected that it would reshape everything people thought they knew about the disappearance. For now, however, in the days following February 16, 1979, all anyone knew was that 5 men were gone, a boat had vanished, and one of the largest searches connected to a small Hawaiian fishing vessel had failed to find even the smallest trace of where the Sarah Jo had gone. When the official search for the Sarah Jo was suspended on February 16, 1979, it marked the end of one chapter of the story, but not the end of the mystery itself. The boat remained missing. The 5 men remained missing. No wreckage had been located. No survivors had been found. No explanation had emerged. What remained was uncertainty, and uncertainty has a way of lingering long after organized efforts come to a close. For the families of Ralph Maliakini, Scott Mormon, Benjamin Kalama, Patrick Wessner, and Peter Hanchett, the disappearance did not become easier simply because the search had ended. If anything, the absence of answers created a different kind of burden. A confirmed loss is painful, but a disappearance leaves room for questions that cannot be resolved. Every possibility remains suspended between hope and fear. The available records make one thing clear: the families never completely abandoned hope. That fact alone speaks to the unusual nature of the case. No evidence had been found that definitively established what had happened. The storm offered a likely explanation for why the vessel vanished, but it did not provide proof. The final communication regarding engine trouble suggested that the boat had experienced difficulties, but it did not reveal the outcome. Without physical evidence, the disappearance remained incomplete. In the months that followed, life continued across Hawaii. Communities carried on with daily routines. Boats continued to leave harbor. Fishermen continued to work and travel the waters surrounding the islands. Yet for those connected to the Sarah Joe, February 11, 1979 remained unfinished. Some mysteries become part of public memory because they involve dramatic crimes or shocking revelations. The Sarah Joe became memorable for the opposite reason. It left behind almost nothing. No confirmed final location. No clear timeline after the last transmission. No surviving witnesses. No recovered vessel. No physical evidence capable of explaining the fate of those aboard. The disappearance seemed to have been swallowed by the Pacific Ocean itself. As the months turned into years, investigators had little new information to examine. There were no major breakthroughs. No discoveries suddenly redirected attention toward a specific explanation. The facts known in 1979 largely remained the facts known throughout the early years of the mystery. 5 men had departed Hannah. A storm had developed. The boat had reported engine trouble. Communication had ceased. The vessel had vanished. Those facts remained unchanged. For families, however, time does not erase questions. Every passing year may reduce the likelihood of a happy outcome, but it does not eliminate the desire to understand what happened. Human beings naturally seek explanations. When a loved one disappears, uncertainty can become one of the most difficult aspects of the experience. The Sarah Joe case presented uncertainty in its purest form. No one knew where the boat had gone. No one knew how long the men survived. No one knew whether the vessel had sunk. No one knew whether it had drifted elsewhere. No one knew whether any of the passengers had reached safety. Every possibility existed because no evidence had emerged to eliminate it. This prolonged absence of information gradually transformed the case into something larger than a routine maritime disappearance. It became the mystery discussed not only among family members and investigators, but also among people fascinated by unexplained events. The Pacific Ocean itself contributed to that fascination. Its immense scale creates conditions unlike almost any other environment. A missing object can disappear across distances so vast that searching every possible location becomes impossible. Currents move constantly. Storms reshape conditions. Evidence may travel far from its point of origin or vanish altogether. The Sarah Joe seemed to embody all of those challenges. Years passed. Still nothing. The lack of developments became a story in itself. Many investigations are driven forward by new discoveries. The Sarah Joe remained frozen in place. Every year that passed without evidence strengthened the perception that the ocean had permanently concealed whatever happened on February 11, 1979. As the 1980s progressed, the mystery remained unresolved. No confirmed sightings of the vessel altered the narrative. No significant physical evidence emerged. No remains were identified. The disappearance continued to exist in a strange state between memory and uncertainty. For some people, the case may have appeared destined to remain unsolved forever. That conclusion would have been understandable. After all, nearly every conventional avenue had produced nothing. Search operations had failed. Years had passed. The Pacific had revealed no clues. Yet one of the most remarkable aspects of the Sarah Joe mystery is that its most important discovery occurred not in the days immediately following the disappearance, but almost a decade later. The passage of time often reduces the likelihood of finding evidence. Boats deteriorate. Weather erases traces. Human memory fades. Investigations become increasingly difficult. In this case, however, time would eventually produce a surprise. As the years accumulated, the missing vessel remained absent from public view. The Sarah Jo seemed lost to history. If anyone had predicted where the boat would eventually be found, they almost certainly would have been wrong. The future location of the Discovery lay thousands of miles away from Hawaii. Not hundreds, thousands. That fact remains one of the most astonishing elements of the entire case. Yet during the years immediately after the disappearance, no one knew that such a discovery awaited. Families continued living with unanswered questions. Investigators possessed no meaningful new evidence. The mystery endured. The silence surrounding the case became almost as significant as the disappearance itself. When people discuss unsolved events, they often focus on dramatic moments: the disappearance, the crime, the discovery, the arrest. What is less frequently discussed is the long period between those moments. The waiting, the uncertainty, the absence of information. In the Sarah Jo case, that period lasted nearly 10 years. Nearly a decade separated the disappearance from the next major development. Think about what that means. Entire chapters of life unfolded during that interval. People moved. Communities changed. Years passed. Yet the mystery remained. The boat was still missing. The men were still missing. The ocean still offered no explanation. For investigators, the case represented a reminder of the limits of certainty. Even with organized search efforts and available resources, some disappearances resist explanation. The Sarah Jo appeared to be one of those cases. For families, the passage of time likely created a difficult balance between acceptance and hope. The absence of evidence did not provide closure, yet the years made resolution increasingly unlikely. Still, the story was not over. Unknown to everyone connected with the case, the Pacific Ocean had not completely erased the evidence. Somewhere far beyond Hawaii, the Sarah Jo still existed. The vessel had not vanished from the world. It had merely vanished from view. And eventually, after years of silence, it would be seen again. The discovery would not happen through an active investigation. It would not emerge from a witness statement. It would not result from a confession or a planned search operation. Instead, it would occur through an unexpected encounter on a remote atoll in the Marshall Islands. The circumstances surrounding that discovery would transform the case from a tragic disappearance into one of the most unusual maritime mysteries associated with Hawaii. Because when the Sarah Jo finally reappeared, it did not come back alone. Alongside the wrecked vessel lay evidence that would generate even more questions than answers. A grave, a human skeleton, a driftwood cross, a story that suddenly became stranger than anyone had imagined. For nearly 10 years, the case had been defined by absence. Soon it would be defined by an extraordinary discovery. And when that discovery finally occurred in September 1988, investigators and families alike would find themselves confronting a new mystery layered on top of the old one. The years of silence were about to end. What emerged from that silence, however, would not provide closure. Instead, it would deepen the enigma of the Sarah Jo and ensure that the disappearance would remain one of the most haunting, unsolved maritime mysteries in Hawaiian history. For nearly 10 years after the disappearance of the Sarah Jo, the Pacific Ocean kept its secrets. The search efforts of February 1979 had failed to locate the vessel. The years that followed produced no meaningful breakthroughs. Families continued living with uncertainty. Investigators had little new information to examine. The case slowly became one of Hawaii's enduring maritime mysteries, a story defined by unanswered questions rather than confirmed facts. By the late 1980s, the disappearance seemed destined to remain unresolved. Then, in September 1988, something extraordinary happened. The breakthrough did not emerge from a renewed investigation. It did not come from a witness who suddenly remembered a forgotten detail. It did not result from advanced technology or a planned search operation focused on the missing boat. Instead, it came from an unexpected discovery in one of the most remote parts of the Pacific Ocean. A marine biologist named John Naughton was conducting survey work in the Marshall Islands. The location was far from Hawaii, separated by a vast expanse of open ocean. The atoll where he was working was isolated, largely untouched, and distant from the places most people associate with the original disappearance. Nothing about the setting suggested a connection to a mystery that had begun nearly a decade earlier near Maui. Yet that connection was waiting there. During his work, Naughton encountered a wrecked boat. Finding a damaged or abandoned vessel in a remote ocean environment is unusual, but it is not necessarily shocking. Storms, currents, accidents, and time can carry boats into unexpected places. The Pacific Ocean is immense, and objects sometimes travel astonishing distances across its surface. At first glance, the wreck may have appeared to be simply another forgotten piece of maritime debris. But when the vessel was examined more closely, a remarkable realization emerged. The boat carried identifying information. Its registration could still be checked. And that registration revealed something astonishing. The vessel was the Sarah Jo. The same Sarah Jo that had disappeared on February 11, 1979. The same Sarah Jo that had vanished during a fishing trip involving 5 men from Hannah. The same Sarah Jo that had been searched for extensively before disappearing from public view for nearly a decade. Against all expectations, the missing boat had been found. The significance of the discovery was immediately apparent. For almost 10 years, there had been no confirmed trace of the vessel. Now it had reappeared. Yet perhaps the most surprising aspect of the discovery was not the condition of the boat itself, but its location. The wreck was found more than 2,000 miles from Hawaii. More than 3,200 kilometers separated the discovery site from the islands, where the mystery had begun. The sheer distance seemed almost unbelievable. The Sarah Jo was a small vessel, only about 17 feet long. When it disappeared, few people could have imagined that it would someday be located thousands of miles across the Pacific. The discovery transformed the case instantly. For years, discussions about the disappearance had centered on what might have happened during the storm off Maui. Now investigators and observers were forced to consider a new reality. The boat had not simply vanished. At some point after the disappearance, it had traveled an extraordinary distance across the ocean. Whether that journey occurred over months or years remained unclear. The available evidence could not establish a precise timeline. Nevertheless, the vessel's presence in the Marshall Islands demonstrated that it had reached a location far beyond the original search area. This realization raised an entirely new series of questions. How had the boat gotten there? What path had it followed? How long had it remained afloat? Had anyone survived aboard it after the disappearance? Did the location of the wreck reveal something about the fate of the men? The discovery that seemed capable of answering old questions immediately created new ones. Yet investigators were not finished examining the area. The wreck itself represented a major breakthrough, but what lay nearby would ultimately become even more important. As the surrounding area was explored, another discovery was made. Not far from the boat was evidence of human presence. There was a grave. The grave stood in stark contrast to the isolation of the atoll. This was not merely a collection of remains scattered by natural forces. The burial appeared intentional. Coral stones had been arranged over the site. A cross made from driftwood marked the location. Someone had clearly taken steps to create a recognizable grave. The implications were startling. A burial requires human action. Someone had been present. Someone had cared enough to mark the site. Someone had deliberately arranged the remains. At that moment, the mystery expanded beyond the disappearance of a boat. Now investigators faced another question. Whose grave was it? The remains recovered from the burial site were subjected to forensic examination. Specialists worked to determine the identity of the individual. In a case that had gone nearly 10 years without meaningful developments, even the possibility of identifying one of the missing men represented a significant breakthrough. Eventually, an answer emerged. Through dental records, the remains were identified as belonging to Scott Mormon. For the first time since the disappearance, one of the 5 missing men had been found. The identification provided something that had been absent from the case for nearly a decade: certainty. Scott Mormon had reached the atoll, or at least his remains had. His fate was no longer completely unknown. Yet even this certainty carried new mysteries with it. The discovery did not explain how Scott arrived there. It did not explain when he died. It did not explain whether he had been alone. It did not explain what happened to the other 4 men. And, perhaps most importantly, it did not explain who had buried him. The grave became the most haunting element of the entire case. Without the grave, investigators might have assumed that Scott's remains simply arrived through natural processes. The burial changed everything. A human being had placed those remains there. A human being had arranged the coral stones. A human being had erected the driftwood cross. Those actions suggested intention, care, and awareness. Yet the identity of that individual remains unknown. Was it another survivor from the Sarah Jo? Was it someone who encountered Scott after the disappearance? Was it a passing fisherman? A visitor to the atoll? The available evidence provided no answer. For families, the discovery must have been emotionally complex. On one hand, the identification of Scott Mormon offered information that had been unavailable for years. One family finally had confirmation regarding the fate of a loved one. On the other hand, the discovery raised profound questions that could not be resolved. The identification of Scott did not explain the overall mystery. Instead, it revealed how little was actually known. The 4 other men remained missing. Ralph Maliakini had not been found. Benjamin Kalama had not been found. Patrick Wessner had not been found. Peter Hanchett had not been found. No confirmed remains belonging to them were discovered. No personal belongings definitively explained their whereabouts. No evidence clarified whether they had reached the atoll or perished elsewhere. The discovery of the Sarah Jo was therefore both a breakthrough and a frustration. It proved that the boat had survived long enough to travel across the Pacific. It confirmed the identity of one missing man, yet it failed to provide a complete narrative. The central mystery endured. Indeed, some observers have argued that the case became even more puzzling after the discovery than it had been before. Prior to 1988, the disappearance could be viewed primarily as a tragedy at sea. A storm, engine trouble, and a missing boat created a plausible explanation. After the discovery, however, the existence of the grave introduced entirely new questions. The wreck answered where the boat ended up. The grave introduced uncertainty about what happened after it arrived. Nearly a decade after the disappearance, the Pacific Ocean had finally returned something. It had returned the vessel. It had returned one of the missing men. But it had not returned the truth. Instead, it offered fragments of a story whose most important chapters remained missing. The discovery in the Marshall Islands marked one of the most extraordinary moments in the history of the case. It transformed the Sarah Jo from a tragic disappearance into a mystery with global dimensions, stretching across thousands of miles of ocean and nearly 10 years of time. Yet the most unsettling question still lay ahead. Because while investigators now knew where the boat had been found and whose remains rested nearby, they still did not know the answer to the question that haunted everyone connected to the case. What happened after the Sarah Jo disappeared into the storm on February 11th, 1979? And who was responsible for the lonely grave that stood beside the wreck on a remote atoll in the middle of the Pacific Ocean? The discovery of the Sarah Jo in September 1988 changed the direction of the mystery, but it did not bring the story to an end. In many investigations, the recovery of a missing vessel would represent a major step toward resolution. Investigators would examine the wreck, reconstruct events, identify victims, and gradually establish a timeline. In the case of the Sarah Jo, however, the opposite occurred. The discovery answered a few questions while creating many more. For nearly 10 years, the central question had been simple. Where did the boat go? The wreck found in the Marshall Islands provided a partial answer. The vessel had traveled, somehow, from Hawaii to a remote atoll more than 2,000 miles away. That fact alone was remarkable. What had once seemed impossible was now undeniable. The boat that disappeared during a storm near Maui had eventually reached a distant location in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. Yet knowing where the vessel ended up did not explain how it got there. Maritime experts and investigators considered the role of ocean currents and wind. The Pacific is shaped by powerful natural forces capable of moving floating objects across enormous distances. According to the information available, many experts regarded such a journey as physically possible. Ocean currents and prevailing winds could, in theory, carry a vessel far from its original location over a long period of time. This explanation helped account for the boat's presence in the Marshall Islands. But even if currents explained the journey of the vessel, they did not explain everything else. The greatest mystery remained the grave. The grave transformed the case from a disappearance at sea into something much more complicated. Had the wrecked boat been found alone, the story might have ended there. Investigators could have concluded that the vessel drifted across the Pacific after the disappearance. The boat's final resting place would have been unusual, but not necessarily inexplicable. The grave changed that. Someone had arranged coral stones. Someone had erected a cross made from driftwood. Someone had created a burial site. Those actions implied human involvement. The question was whose involvement. One possibility suggested by observers was that Scott Mormon himself may have survived long enough to reach the atoll. If that happened, he may have died there sometime afterward. Yet even that possibility immediately raises another question. If Scott reached the island alone, who buried him? A person cannot create a grave for himself after death. The existence of the burial suggested the presence of at least one other individual. Another possibility was that one or more of the other men from the Sarah Joe survived long enough to reach the atoll as well. Under this scenario, a surviving companion could have buried Scott before later dying or disappearing. Yet there is no evidence confirming such an event. No remains belonging to Ralph Maliakini, Benjamin Kalama, Patrick Wessner, or Peter Hanchett were found on the atoll. No objects discovered at the site established that any of them had been present there. As a result, the theory remains only a possibility. Another explanation considered by observers was that unrelated individuals may have discovered Scott's remains at some point and chosen to bury him. Fishermen, sailors, or visitors passing through the area might have encountered a body and performed a respectful burial. The driftwood cross and arrangement of coral stones could be interpreted as acts of compassion by someone who did not know the deceased but felt obligated to provide some form of dignity. Again, however, there is no evidence identifying such a person. No witness ever came forward. No records explained the burial. No documentation revealed who created the grave. The identity of the individual responsible remains unknown. This uncertainty is what continues to make the Sarah Joe case so compelling decades later. Most mysteries eventually narrow toward a single explanation. The Sarah Joe remains open to multiple possibilities because critical pieces of information are missing. The recovery of Scott Mormon's remains through dental identification provided one important fact. He was the only member of the group whose death could be confirmed. That distinction remains significant. As of 2026, Scott Mormon is the only one of the 5 men who has been positively identified through recovered remains. The other 4 men remain missing. Their ultimate fate is unknown. Their locations are unknown. No confirmed evidence establishes exactly what happened to them after the disappearance. The absence of those answers has kept the mystery alive through generations. When people examine the Sarah Joe case today, they often focus on the dramatic elements: the storm, the missing boat, the discovery thousands of miles away, and the grave on the remote atoll. Yet beneath those details lies a simpler human story. 5 men left home expecting to return. They never did. Families spent years waiting for answers. Most of those answers never came. The mystery also highlights the limits of investigation when events occur on the open ocean. On land, crimes and accidents often leave traces. Witnesses may see something. Cameras may capture evidence. Physical clues can survive for years. At sea, circumstances are different. Water destroys evidence. Storms alter locations. Currents scatter debris. Distances create enormous challenges for search operations. The Sarah Joe case illustrates those realities in dramatic fashion. Despite a major search effort involving the Coast Guard, Marines, Civil Air Patrol, private boats, and aircraft, no trace of the vessel was found in 1979. Despite nearly a decade passing before the wreck was discovered, investigators still could not reconstruct the complete story. Despite the identification of Scott Mormon, the fate of the other 4 men remains unknown. The mystery endures not because investigators ignored evidence, but because so little evidence survived. Among the various explanations proposed over the years, one has generally been viewed as the most plausible by many maritime experts and investigators. According to this interpretation, the storm that developed around Maui played the central role in the tragedy. The sequence is straightforward. The Sarah Jo encountered severe weather. The boat experienced engine trouble. The vessel lost effective control. Ocean currents and wind gradually carried it away from Hawaii. At least one member of the group may have eventually reached the atoll, where the wreck was later discovered. The remaining men likely died at sea or before reaching land. This explanation fits many of the known facts. Yet even this theory contains uncertainties. It cannot identify who buried Scott Mormon. It cannot establish exactly when deaths occurred. It cannot account for every stage of the vessel's journey. It cannot explain what happened to the 4 men whose remains have never been found. That is why the Sarah Jo remains a mystery rather than a solved case. The years since the discovery have not produced definitive new answers. No additional remains have been identified. No hidden records have emerged. No witness has provided a complete explanation. The story remains suspended between what is known and what can only be inferred. Perhaps that is why the case continues to resonate with so many people. It combines elements that rarely appear together. There is no confirmed crime. There is no identified villain. There is no courtroom conclusion. Instead, there is a storm, a disappearance, a decade of silence, a wrecked boat on a distant atoll, and a solitary grave marked by a driftwood cross. Each element feels significant. Together they form a puzzle that has resisted solution for decades. Today, when people speak about the Sarah Jo, they are not simply discussing a missing boat. They are discussing one of Hawaii's most enduring unanswered questions. They are discussing the fate of 5 men who vanished into the Pacific. They are discussing a mystery that stretches across thousands of miles of ocean and nearly half a century of time. And they're still asking the same questions that emerged when the wreck was discovered in 1988. How did the boat make that extraordinary journey? What happened during the days, weeks, or months after the final radio transmission? What became of Ralph Maliakini, Benjamin Kalama, Patrick Wessner, and Peter Hanchett? And perhaps most haunting of all, who placed the coral stones, built the driftwood cross, and created the lonely grave beside the wreck of the Sarah Jo? One of the most difficult aspects of the Sarah Jo mystery is that nearly every discussion eventually returns to the unanswered questions. The missing boat, the violent storm, the discovery on a distant atoll, the grave marked by coral stones, and a driftwood cross. These are the elements that transformed a local tragedy into one of Hawaii's most enduring maritime mysteries. Yet behind every mystery are human lives. Long before the Sarah Jo became a subject of investigation, speculation, and historical interest, it was simply a fishing boat carrying 5 men who were known and loved by people waiting at home. When the vessel departed Hana on the morning of February 11th, 1979, nobody expected it to become famous. Nobody imagined that decades later people would still be discussing its disappearance. Nobody anticipated that the boat would eventually be found thousands of miles away in the Marshall Islands. The families of the men aboard were not thinking about future mysteries. They were thinking about a routine fishing trip. That reality is important because it places the story back where it belongs. Not in the realm of legend. Not in the realm of speculation, but in the lives of ordinary people whose futures changed forever. The disappearance of the Sarah Jo was not a single event that ended on one afternoon in 1979. For the relatives of Ralph Maliakini, Scott Mormon, Benjamin Kalama, Patrick Wessner, and Peter Hanchett, it became a continuing experience measured not in days, but in years. The initial shock was likely tied to uncertainty. A delayed return can often be explained. Mechanical problems happen. Weather creates complications. Communication systems fail. As hours pass without contact, concern grows. As days pass, concern becomes fear. When a search operation begins, hope and anxiety often exist side by side. Families watch rescue efforts and wait for news. Every aircraft sighting matters. Every radio report matters. Every rumor matters. The possibility of a positive outcome remains alive. The search for the Sarah Jo involved significant resources. The Coast Guard participated. The Marines participated. The Civil Air Patrol participated. Private vessels joined the effort. Aircraft surveyed enormous areas of ocean. For family members, the size of the search may have provided reassurance that everything possible was being done. At the same time, the very existence of such a large operation highlighted the seriousness of the situation. As the days passed without success, the emotional burden almost certainly grew heavier. The Pacific Ocean is vast beyond ordinary comprehension. People standing on shore can see only a fraction of it. Search planners looking at maps confront enormous distances. Once a vessel disappears into that environment, finding it becomes extraordinarily difficult. The families of the 5 missing men were forced to confront that reality. Then came the suspension of the search. Officially, the decision reflected operational realities. Search teams had covered immense areas. No evidence had been located. No new information was directing the search toward a specific location. But official decisions often carry emotional consequences that extend far beyond their practical purpose. When a search ends without answers, uncertainty remains. Questions remain. Hope remains as well, though often in a changed form. The years that followed must have been defined by waiting. The available facts tell us that families never completely gave up hope. That statement alone carries enormous weight. Hope is easy to maintain during the first days of a disappearance. It becomes more difficult after weeks. More difficult still after months. Yet the absence of evidence in the Sarah Jo case meant that certainty never arrived. There was no wreck. No confirmed location. No identified remains. No explanation. Without those things, the story remained unfinished. As time passed, the disappearance entered a strange space between memory and expectation. Life moved forward because it had to. Years passed. Communities changed. Yet the mystery remained frozen in place. Somewhere beyond the horizon, unanswered questions continued to exist. For nearly a decade, there was little reason to expect a breakthrough. Many maritime disappearances remain unsolved forever. The ocean has a way of concealing evidence. Storms erase traces. Currents scatter debris. Distances complicate recovery efforts. The Sarah Jo appeared destined to join that category of mysteries. Then came September 1988. The discovery of the wreck changed everything. Imagine learning that a boat missing for almost 10 years had been found more than 2,000 miles away. The revelation would have been astonishing for anyone following the case. For the families, it represented something even more significant. After years without meaningful information, there was finally evidence. The boat had been located. The disappearance was no longer completely invisible. Something tangible had emerged from the silence. Yet the discovery also brought painful realities. The identification of Scott Mormon's remains through dental records confirmed that at least one of the missing men had died. Confirmation can provide information, but information is not the same as closure. The discovery answered one question while leaving many others unresolved. Scott had been found. The others had not. The grave existed. The identity of the person who created it did not. The boat had reached the atoll. The details of its journey remained unknown. The families therefore found themselves in a situation familiar to many people connected to unsolved cases. A breakthrough had occurred, yet the central mystery remained. The discovery of Scott's remains may have carried particular emotional significance because he became the only member of the group whose fate could be partially confirmed. Even today, he remains the only one positively identified. The other 4 men continue to be listed as missing. That distinction highlights the incomplete nature of the case. One family received some answers. 4 families still lacked them. Even the answer that emerged was limited. The identification established who the remains belonged to. It did not establish precisely how Scott died. It did not establish how he arrived at the atoll. It did not establish who buried him. The mystery continued. This pattern appears repeatedly throughout the Sarah Jo story. Every discovery seems to reveal another question. Every answer exposes another uncertainty. The recovered boat explained where the vessel ended up. It did not explain the final days of the people aboard. The grave explained that someone had taken deliberate action. It did not explain who that person was. The identification explained whose remains were present. It did not explain what happened to everyone else. As decades passed, the case became part of Hawaii's historical memory. New generations learned about the disappearance. Researchers revisited the facts. Maritime experts discussed possible explanations. Yet for the families, the story was never merely a historical event. It was personal. The names often listed in articles and documentaries represented real individuals. Ralph Maliakini, Scott Mormon, Benjamin Kalama, Patrick Wessner, Peter Hanchett. 5 men who left Hannah expecting to return. 5 men whose lives became connected forever through a single day at sea. One of the reasons the Sarah Jo case continues to resonate is that it reflects a universal human experience, the need for answers. People naturally seek explanations. When events remain unresolved, curiosity persists. When loved ones disappear, that need becomes even stronger. The Sarah Jo offers no final resolution. Instead, it presents fragments. A departure. A storm. Engine trouble. A failed search. Years of silence. A wrecked boat. A grave. One identified victim. 4 missing men. The spaces between those facts remain largely empty. Perhaps that is why the story has endured for so long. The mystery is not driven by sensational details or criminal accusations. It is driven by absence. The absence of certainty. The absence of evidence. The absence of final answers. And behind that absence stand families who spent decades living with questions that have never been fully resolved. The ocean eventually returned the Sarah Jo. It eventually returned evidence connected to Scott Mormon. But it never returned a complete explanation. For the families of the 5 men, that reality remains the most difficult part of the story. Because even now, decades after the disappearance, the Pacific Ocean continues to hold many of the answers that people have been seeking since the afternoon of February 11, 1979. And those answers, if they still exist at all, remain hidden somewhere beyond the horizon. By the time the Sarah Jo was discovered in the Marshall Islands in 1988, nearly 10 years had passed since the disappearance. The wreck transformed the case from a missing vessel mystery into something far more complex. Instead of ending speculation, the discovery intensified it. Investigators, maritime experts, family members, and later researchers all found themselves confronting the same challenge. How do you explain an event when the most important pieces of evidence are missing? The desire to find explanations is a natural human response to uncertainty. When a mystery remains unsolved for decades, theories inevitably emerge. Some theories are grounded in evidence. Others arise from imagination. The Sarah Jo case has inspired both. Yet one of the most important aspects of examining this mystery is recognizing the difference between what is known and what is merely possible. The known facts are surprisingly few. 5 men departed Hannah on February 11, 1979. The weather was initially calm. A storm developed later that day. The vessel reported engine trouble. Communication ceased. An extensive search failed to locate the boat. Nearly 10 years later, the Sarah Jo was discovered on a remote atoll in the Marshall Islands. The remains of Scott Mormon were found in a grave nearby and identified through dental records. The other 4 men were never found. Everything beyond those facts enters the realm of interpretation. This distinction is important because unsolved mysteries often become vulnerable to speculation. Over time, assumptions can begin to sound like facts. Possibilities can become mistaken for conclusions. The Sarah Jo case demonstrates why careful separation of evidence and theory matters. Among the various explanations proposed over the years, the one most widely accepted by maritime investigators and experts, remains rooted in natural forces rather than extraordinary circumstances. According to this interpretation, the storm that developed around Maui on February 11th played the central role. The sequence appears plausible. The Sarah Joe encountered deteriorating weather. The vessel experienced engine trouble. Its ability to navigate effectively became compromised. Strong winds and ocean currents gradually pushed the boat away from Hawaii. Over time, the vessel drifted across vast stretches of the Pacific Ocean. From a maritime perspective, this explanation aligns with known physical processes. Ocean currents are powerful. They operate continuously. Over months and years, they can transport floating objects remarkable distances. Although the journey from Hawaii to the Marshall Islands appears astonishing, experts have noted that such movement is physically possible. This explanation addresses one of the mystery's most surprising elements, the location of the wreck. Yet, even if the boat's journey can be explained through currents and weather, the human story remains unresolved. The fate of the passengers is another matter entirely. One possibility is that some or all of the men survived the initial storm but later succumbed to exposure, dehydration, injury, or other dangers associated with being stranded at sea. This theory is consistent with the fact that Scott Moorman's remains were eventually found. However, consistency is not proof. The available evidence cannot establish how long anyone survived after the final transmission. No timeline exists. No witness testimony exists. No written account exists. The ocean preserved almost none of the information investigators needed. This absence creates a recurring challenge throughout the case. Every theory eventually encounters a barrier. There simply is not enough evidence to move beyond certain points. The mystery of the grave illustrates this problem perfectly. The grave is one of the most intriguing pieces of evidence in the entire case because it appears to reflect deliberate human action. Coral stones were arranged. A driftwood cross was erected. The burial site was marked. Those facts suggest intention. Yet they reveal nothing about the identity of the person responsible. One theory proposes that another survivor from the Sarah Joe created the grave. This possibility attracts attention because it offers a direct connection between the disappearance and the burial. If another member of the group survived long enough to bury Scott, then at least two people may have reached the atoll. The problem is that no evidence confirms this scenario. No remains belonging to the other four men were found. No artifacts establish their presence. No records support the theory. As a result, it remains possible but unproven. Another theory suggests that unrelated visitors to the atoll discovered Scott's remains and chose to provide a respectful burial. The driftwood cross and coral markers certainly appear consistent with a deliberate act of care. Someone encountering human remains in such an isolated place might reasonably decide to create a simple grave. Again, however, evidence is lacking. No individual ever came forward. No documentation has identified who performed the burial. No witnesses explain the event. The theory remains plausible, but no more than that. The grave therefore occupies a unique place within the mystery. It is simultaneously one of the strongest pieces of evidence and one of the greatest sources of uncertainty. It confirms human involvement. It does not identify the human involved. Another significant limitation involves the passage of time itself. Nearly 10 years elapsed between the disappearance and the discovery of the wreck. Time changes evidence. Objects deteriorate. Environmental conditions alter locations. Potential clues disappear. The longer a mystery remains unresolved, the more difficult it often becomes to reconstruct events accurately. In the Sarah Joe case, this challenge is particularly severe. The most critical period, the hours and days immediately following the final transmission, remains completely undocumented. No one knows what occurred during that time. Investigators can infer possibilities. Experts can evaluate probabilities. But certainty remains unattainable. This reality explains why the case continues to fascinate researchers. Many mysteries are eventually solved because evidence accumulates. The Sarah Joe presents the opposite situation. Evidence is extraordinarily limited. Each fact carries enormous importance because there are so few of them. The final transmission matters because it is among the last confirmed events. The storm matters because it represents the most obvious danger. The wreck matters because it proves the boat survived beyond the initial disappearance. The grave matters because it suggests human activity after the disappearance. Scott Moorman's identification matters because it provides the only confirmed fate among the 5 men. Every fact becomes significant because so much remains unknown. The case also highlights the limitations of even large-scale search operations. The search launched after the disappearance involved multiple agencies and covered enormous areas of ocean. The effort was substantial. Yet despite those resources, the boat was not found. This outcome is not necessarily a reflection of failure. Rather, it illustrates the challenges inherent in searching vast maritime environments. The Pacific Ocean does not easily surrender what it conceals. Weather changes rapidly. Search areas expand quickly. Distances become overwhelming. Even today, with advanced technology, locating a small vessel on open water can be extremely difficult. In 1979, those challenges were even greater. As a result, the inability to find the Sarah Joe during the original search is understandable. What remains extraordinary is that the vessel was eventually found at all. The discovery in 1988 stands as one of the most remarkable developments in the history of maritime mysteries associated with Hawaii. Yet remarkable discoveries do not always produce complete answers. Sometimes they simply redirect attention. The Sarah Joe is a perfect example. Before the wreck was found, people asked where the boat went. After it was found, people asked how it got there. Before the grave was discovered, people wondered whether anyone survived. After the grave was discovered, people wondered who created it. Every answer generated a new question. Every revelation deepened the mystery. Decades later, investigators and researchers continue to face the same limitations. The available evidence allows certain conclusions. A storm occurred. The vessel experienced mechanical trouble. The boat ultimately reached the Marshall Islands. Scott Moorman's remains were buried on the atoll. Beyond those points, certainty fades. The remaining questions persist because no evidence exists to resolve them conclusively. Perhaps that is the most important lesson of the Sarah Joe mystery. Not every tragedy produces a complete explanation. Not every disappearance ends with certainty. Sometimes evidence survives only in fragments. Sometimes those fragments point toward a likely story without revealing the entire truth. The Sarah Joe remains one of those cases. A mystery shaped by weather, distance, time, and the immense power of the Pacific Ocean. A mystery in which the known facts form only part of the picture. And a mystery that continues to challenge anyone who attempts to answer the question that has existed since February 1979. What truly happened to the 5 men who sailed away from Hannah and never returned? There are some mysteries that endure because crucial evidence remains hidden. There are others that persist because the available evidence seems to point in multiple directions at once. The Sarah Joe occupies a unique place between those two categories. Decades after the disappearance, investigators and observers possess enough information to understand portions of the story, yet not enough to understand the whole of it. The result is a mystery defined by silence. Not the silence of inactivity, not the silence of neglect, but the silence created when nature withholds answers. The Pacific Ocean has always been central to the Sarah Joe story. It was the setting in which the disappearance occurred. It became the environment through which the vessel apparently traveled. It ultimately served as the backdrop for the discovery of both the wreck and Scott Moorman's remains. At every stage of the case, the ocean is present. It connects all known events. It also obscures many of them. When people think about mysteries, they often focus on human actions. They search for motives, decisions, mistakes, or hidden intentions. In criminal investigations, understanding human behavior is frequently the key to solving a case. The Sarah Joe differs from those situations. No evidence points toward a crime. No suspect exists. No identified act of violence explains the disappearance. Instead, investigators confront a different challenge. They must understand an event shaped largely by weather, distance, time, and the immense power of the sea. That does not make the mystery less compelling. If anything, it makes it more unsettling. Human mysteries often provide the possibility of eventual confession, discovery, or accountability. Natural mysteries do not. A storm cannot explain itself. An ocean current cannot provide testimony. The sea leaves evidence only when it chooses to do so. In February 1979, the Pacific provided almost nothing. The search operation demonstrated just how difficult it can be to locate a small vessel in a vast maritime environment. Multiple organizations participated. Aircraft surveyed enormous areas. Boats searched extensively. Yet the ocean revealed no trace of the Sarah Jo. This absence shaped the investigation from the beginning. Had the boat been located immediately, investigators might have learned much more. Physical evidence could have been examined. The vessel's condition might have provided clues regarding the sequence of events. Search teams might have gained a clearer understanding of what occurred during the storm. Instead, the ocean concealed the vessel for nearly a decade. That period of concealment transformed the case. The years without evidence allowed uncertainty to become embedded within the mystery itself. When the wreck finally emerged in 1988, many people hoped it would provide closure. Instead, it offered only fragments. Fragments can be powerful. They can point toward truth. They can suggest explanations. But they rarely tell the entire story. The Sarah Jo became a collection of fragments. A final radio transmission mentioning engine trouble. A severe storm. A failed search. A wrecked vessel more than 2,000 miles from Hawaii. A grave marked by coral stones. The remains of Scott Moorman. For men still missing. These fragments create an outline. The challenge is that the space between them remains largely empty. One reason the mystery continues to resonate is that the Pacific Ocean itself feels almost like an unseen participant in the story. Not a character. Not a force with intention, but a presence. A vast environment capable of preserving some evidence while destroying other evidence completely. The ocean returned the boat. The ocean returned one set of remains. The ocean did not return answers. This imbalance is part of what makes the case so haunting. Imagine the difference if all 5 men had been found. Imagine the difference if a written account had survived. Imagine the difference if evidence clearly established what happened after the final transmission. The mystery would be transformed. Instead, investigators are left with possibilities rather than conclusions. The ocean effectively controls the boundaries of what can be known. This reality has influenced every discussion surrounding the Sarah Jo. Maritime experts have examined how currents could carry a vessel across great distances. Researchers have studied the geography of the Marshall Islands. Observers have analyzed the significance of the grave. Yet all of these efforts eventually encounter the same limitation. Evidence ends. Questions continue. The contrast between certainty and uncertainty is especially striking in the case of Scott Moorman. His identification through dental records provided one of the strongest facts in the entire investigation. The remains belong to Scott. That conclusion could be established with confidence. Yet almost everything surrounding that fact remains uncertain. How did he arrive at the atoll? When did he die? Was he alone? Did anyone accompany him? Who buried him? The certainty of identification exists alongside profound uncertainty about circumstances. This pattern repeats throughout the case. The Sarah Jo was found. How it completed its journey remains unclear. A grave existed. Its creator remains unknown. 5 men disappeared. Only one has been identified. The mystery constantly alternates between what is known and what is unknowable. Perhaps that is why the story continues to attract attention decades later. Many unsolved cases eventually lose public interest because new evidence never emerges. The Sarah Jo remains different because the evidence that does exist is so unusual. A missing boat discovered thousands of miles away is remarkable. A grave on a remote atoll is remarkable. A single identified victim among 5 missing men is remarkable. Each element feels significant. Together, they create a narrative that resists simple explanation. The case also reminds us of how small human beings can seem in comparison to the environments they inhabit. The Sarah Joe was a 17-foot boat. The Pacific Ocean covers millions of square miles. Search teams worked tirelessly. The ocean remained vast. Families waited for answers. The ocean remained silent. Investigators pursued explanations. The ocean revealed only fragments. There is a humility embedded within that reality. Despite technology, expertise, and determination, some mysteries remain beyond complete understanding. That does not mean investigators failed. It does not mean families stopped caring. It simply means that nature sometimes limits what can be recovered. The Sarah Joe stands as a powerful example of those limits. Even now, many of the most important questions remain unchanged from the moment the wreck was discovered in 1988. What happened after communication ended? How long did the vessel remain afloat? What became of Ralph Maliakini? What became of Benjamin Kalama? What became of Patrick Wessner? What became of Peter Hanchett? Who buried Scott Mormon? The persistence of these questions demonstrates how little certainty has emerged despite the passage of time. Yet perhaps the mystery is not defined solely by what is missing. Perhaps it is also defined by what remains. The names remain. The memory of the 5 men remains. The record of the search remains. The discovery of the wreck remains. The grave remains one of the most intriguing pieces of evidence in maritime history connected to Hawaii. And the determination of families seeking answers remains one of the most important aspects of the story. Because behind every theory and every unanswered question are real people whose lives were altered forever by a single day at sea. The ocean may have concealed much of what happened. It may continue to withhold the final answers. But it has not erased the significance of the people involved. As long as the story of the Sarah Joe is remembered, Ralph Maliakini, Scott Mormon, Benjamin Kalama, Patrick Wessner, and Peter Hanchett remain part of that memory. Their disappearance continues to matter because it represents more than a maritime puzzle. It represents the enduring human search for understanding. And in that search, the greatest obstacle has always been the same immense body of water that first carried the Sarah Joe beyond the horizon. The Pacific Ocean gave rise to the mystery. The Pacific Ocean preserved part of it. And after all these years, the Pacific Ocean still guards many of the answers that investigators, families, and observers continue to seek. Most mysteries gradually move toward a conclusion. Evidence accumulates, witnesses come forward, technology improves, or forgotten records are rediscovered. Even when answers arrive slowly, there is often a sense that an investigation is moving in a particular direction. The Sarah Joe case has never followed that path. More than 4 decades after 5 men departed Hannah for what should have been a routine fishing trip, the central questions remain almost exactly as they were when the disappearance first occurred. This persistence is one of the reasons the story continues to occupy a unique place in Hawaii's history. The case has survived the passage of time in a way that few mysteries do. Entire generations have grown up since February 1979. Communities have changed. Technology has transformed nearly every aspect of modern life. Methods of search and rescue have improved dramatically. Communication systems have evolved beyond anything available at the time the Sarah Joe vanished. Yet despite all those changes, the mystery itself remains remarkably intact. The fundamental facts have not changed. 5 men left Hannah aboard a 17-foot Boston whaler named Sarah Joe. A powerful storm developed. The boat experienced engine trouble. Communication ended. The search found nothing. Nearly 10 years later, the wreck appeared on a remote atoll in the Marshall Islands. Scott Mormon's remains were discovered nearby. The other 4 men were never found. Everything else remains uncertain. When people encounter the story for the first time, they are often surprised by how little definitive information exists. The timeline appears straightforward at first glance. A boat disappears. Years later it is found. Yet the closer one examines the details, the more apparent the gaps become. Those gaps are where the mystery lives. What happened between the final radio communication and the eventual appearance of the wreck in the Marshall Islands? How long did the vessel remain afloat? How long did any survivors remain alive, if there were survivors? Who reached the atoll? Who buried Scott Mormon? What became of the other 4 men? The available evidence cannot answer any of these questions with certainty. This absence of certainty has encouraged decades of discussion. Researchers have revisited the case repeatedly. Maritime specialists have examined possible drift patterns. Writers have explored the human dimensions of the disappearance. Families have continued seeking understanding. Yet every effort eventually arrives at the same boundary. The facts stop. The questions continue. One reason the mystery remains so powerful is that it does not depend on a criminal investigation. Many famous unsolved cases focus on suspects, motives, and potential perpetrators. Public interest often centers on identifying who committed a crime. The Sarah Jo presents a different kind of mystery. There is no confirmed murder. There is no identified criminal act. There is no suspect whose guilt or innocence dominates discussion. Instead, the mystery revolves around fate itself. What happened to 5 experienced men after their boat encountered trouble in a storm? The lack of a criminal element changes the emotional character of the case. The focus remains on the missing men rather than on a perpetrator. Attention returns again and again to the same human reality. 5 people vanished. Only 1 was eventually found. 4 remain missing. This reality gives the case a sense of incompleteness that has never disappeared. Even the discovery of Scott Mormon's remains, significant as it was, did not truly resolve anything. It provided an answer regarding one member of the group, but it left the broader mystery untouched. Indeed, one could argue that the discovery deepened the mystery. Before 1988, people wondered where the Sarah Jo had gone. After 1988, they knew where it ended up. The challenge became explaining how it got there and what happened along the way. The grave remains central to those questions. Among all the evidence connected to the case, nothing captures the imagination more than the burial site found near the wreck. The image itself is striking. A remote atoll, a wrecked boat, a grave covered with coral stones and marked by a cross made from driftwood. The scene seems to demand an explanation. Yet no explanation has ever been confirmed. The grave suggests compassion. It suggests intention. It suggests the presence of another person. But it reveals nothing about who that person was. This uncertainty transforms the grave into one of the most compelling, unanswered questions in maritime history. Every theory encounters limitations. If another member of the Sarah Jo crew buried Scott, where is the evidence of that person's presence? If strangers buried him, who were they? Why did no record survive? Why did nobody come forward? The evidence provides clues, but not conclusions. That distinction is important. Many mysteries survive because information is hidden. The Sarah Jo survives because the information that exists points in multiple directions while refusing to provide a complete picture. As years became decades, the case gradually entered Hawaii's collective memory. It became more than a missing boat. It became a symbol of the unpredictability of the ocean. The Hawaiian Islands have always maintained a close relationship with the sea. Communities depend upon it. Families work upon it. Generations learn to respect it. The Sarah Jo serves as a reminder that even experienced individuals can encounter circumstances beyond their control. The 5 men aboard the vessel were not strangers to the ocean. According to the available information, they were experienced seafarers familiar with local conditions. Their experience makes the disappearance even more sobering. If such a tragedy could happen to them, it underscores the power of the environment they faced. At the same time, the case also illustrates the limitations of human knowledge. Modern society often assumes that every mystery can eventually be solved. We live in an era of satellites, digital communication, advanced forensic science, and sophisticated search technology. There is a tendency to believe that answers are always obtainable if enough effort is applied. The Sarah Jo challenges that assumption. Some events occur in places where evidence is scarce. Some tragedies unfold in environments that erase traces faster than investigators can recover them. Some stories leave behind only fragments. The Sarah Joe is one of those stories. Despite years of attention, no definitive explanation has emerged. Despite the discovery of the wreck, no complete timeline has been reconstructed. Despite the recovery of Scott Mormon's remains, the fate of the others remains unknown. The mystery persists because the evidence itself is incomplete. And yet there is another reason the case continues to matter. It speaks to something universal. Human beings seek closure. We want endings. We want stories to make sense. When an event remains unresolved, it creates a kind of tension that can endure for generations. The Sarah Joe embodies that tension. The story has a beginning. 5 friends leave for a fishing trip. It has a middle. A storm arrives, communication fails, and a massive search follows. It even has a surprising later chapter. The wreck is discovered thousands of miles away. But the ending never arrives. The final pages are missing. The absence of those pages is what continues to draw people back to the mystery. Every generation encounters the same unanswered questions. Every generation examines the same limited evidence. Every generation reaches the same conclusion. No one truly knows what happened after the Sarah Joe disappeared beyond the horizon. Perhaps that uncertainty is the most honest legacy of the case. Not every mystery ends with certainty. Not every disappearance receives a complete explanation. Sometimes all that remains are facts, memories, and questions. The facts tell us that 5 men departed Hannah on February 11th, 1979. The memories preserve their names. The questions continue to echo across the decades. As long as those questions remain unanswered, the Sarah Joe will continue to occupy a unique place in Hawaii's history. It will remain a story about friendship, loss, endurance, and the immense scale of the Pacific Ocean. It will remain a story about a boat that vanished and reappeared nearly 10 years later. It will remain a story about a solitary grave on a remote atoll. And above all, it will remain a story about 5 men whose final journey has never been fully understood, a mystery suspended between what is known and what may never be known, continuing to endure long after the storm itself has passed into history. Every unsolved mystery leaves behind a legacy. Sometimes that legacy is measured through criminal investigations that continue for decades. Sometimes it is found in changes to laws, procedures, or public awareness. In other cases, the legacy exists primarily in memory. The Sarah Joe belongs to that final category. More than 40 years after 5 men disappeared during a fishing trip off Maui, the case remains alive not because of new evidence or dramatic breakthroughs, but because it continues to represent one of the most haunting unanswered questions in Hawaiian history. The story has endured because it combines 2 powerful realities. The first is tragedy. The second is uncertainty. Tragedy alone can be devastating, but uncertainty gives tragedy an unusual ability to persist across generations. When a clear explanation exists, people eventually find a way to place events within the past. Even painful memories can settle into history when answers are available. The Sarah Joe never received that opportunity. The disappearance remains suspended between fact and mystery. The known events are straightforward. 5 experienced men left Hannah on February 11th, 1979. They boarded a 17-foot Boston whaler named Sarah Joe. The weather initially appeared favorable. A severe storm developed later. The vessel reported engine trouble. Communication ended. An extensive search failed to locate the boat. Nearly 10 years later, the wreck was discovered on a remote atoll in the Marshall Islands, more than 2,000 miles from Hawaii. Nearby, investigators found the remains of Scott Mormon buried beneath coral stones and marked with a driftwood cross. The other 4 men were never found. Those facts have remained unchanged for decades. What has changed is the meaning people attach to them. Over time, the Sarah Joe became more than a disappearance. It became a symbol of the mysteries that still exist in a world often assumed to be fully understood. Modern society tends to believe that every question can eventually be answered through technology, science, or persistence. Satellite imagery covers much of the planet. Communication networks connect distant regions instantly. Search techniques are more advanced than ever before. Yet the Sarah Joe serves as a reminder that some events still resist complete explanation. The Pacific Ocean remains one of the largest and most powerful environments on Earth. Its immense scale challenges human assumptions about control and certainty. The disappearance of the Sarah Joe illustrates how quickly familiar circumstances can become extraordinary when they unfold on open water. A routine fishing trip became an international mystery. A small boat vanished. Years later, it reappeared on the other side of a vast ocean. Even today, that sequence of events feels almost unbelievable. Yet it happened. The case also reminds us that mysteries do not need criminal suspects to capture public attention. Many famous unsolved stories revolve around questions of guilt and innocence. People become invested in identifying perpetrators, understanding motives, and seeking justice. The Sarah Joe is different. No evidence points toward murder. No suspect stands at the center of the narrative. No courtroom proceedings define the story. Instead, the mystery emerges from absence. The absence of contact. The absence of evidence. The absence of certainty. That distinction gives the case a different emotional quality. The focus remains on the missing men themselves rather than on someone responsible for harming them. As a result, the story often feels more reflective than confrontational. The names remain central. Ralph Maliakini, Scott Mormon, Benjamin Kalama, Patrick Wessner, Peter Hanchett. These are not merely names attached to a historical event. They are the reason the story continues to matter. Behind every discussion of currents, storms, drift patterns, and maritime theories stand 5 individuals who never return home. Remembering that fact is essential. Mysteries can sometimes become abstract. People discuss evidence, timelines, and possibilities while gradually losing sight of the human lives involved. The Sarah Joe should always be understood first as a story about people. 5 friends left for a day of fishing. Their families expected them to return. They never did. Everything else follows from that reality. The discovery of Scott Mormon's remains in 1988 added another dimension to the legacy of the case. For nearly a decade, there had been no physical confirmation regarding any member of the group. Then, suddenly, one of the missing men was found. Yet even that discovery reflected the strange nature of the mystery. The identification answered one question while creating several others. Scott's remains had reached the atoll. How? Scott had been buried. By whom? A grave existed. Who created it? The case repeatedly demonstrates how answers and questions can coexist. That coexistence is part of what keeps the story alive. Each generation encounters the same paradox. Important evidence exists. Crucial evidence does not. The result is a mystery that feels simultaneously close to resolution and impossibly distant from it. The grave itself has become one of the defining images associated with the Sarah Joe. A driftwood cross standing on a remote Pacific atoll is an image that remains difficult to forget. It suggests humanity in an otherwise isolated setting. It suggests respect. It suggests that someone at some point cared enough to mark a burial. Yet the identity of that person remains unknown. That unknown figure has become one of the silent presences within the story. Not because investigators suspect wrongdoing, but because the existence of the grave implies an encounter that was never documented. Someone was there. Someone performed the burial. Someone left without leaving an explanation. That unanswered question continues to fascinate observers decades later. Beyond the mystery itself, the Sarah Joe has become an important part of Hawaii's maritime history. The islands have always maintained a deep relationship with the ocean. The sea provides transportation, food, cultural identity, recreation, and livelihood. It also demands respect. The disappearance serves as a reminder of that reality. The 5 men aboard the Sarah Joe were not inexperienced adventurers. According to the available information, they were familiar with the ocean and with local conditions. Their experience underscores a difficult truth. Knowledge and skill can reduce risk, but they cannot eliminate it entirely. Nature remains powerful. Weather remains unpredictable. The ocean remains capable of overwhelming even those who understand it well. This lesson has contributed to the lasting significance of the case. The Sarah Joe is not remembered solely because it is mysterious. It is remembered because it reflects the relationship between human beings and the natural world. A relationship defined by familiarity, dependence, respect, and sometimes tragedy. As of 2026, no official conclusion has resolved the disappearance completely. Scott Mormon remains the only confirmed fatality. The other 4 men remain missing. The most widely accepted explanation continues to involve the storm, engine trouble, loss of control, and a long drift across the Pacific driven by currents and wind. Yet, even this explanation leaves critical questions unanswered. The final chapter remains unwritten. Perhaps it always will. Not every mystery receives a definitive solution. Some stories survive precisely because certainty never arrives. The Sarah Joe has become one of those stories. Its endurance reflects both the strength of memory and the persistence of unanswered questions. More than 4 decades have passed since the boat departed Hannah. The storm is long gone. The search operation has become history. The wreck has been studied. The theories have been debated. Yet the essential mystery remains. What happened after the final radio transmission? What became of the 4 men whose remains have never been found? Who created the grave on the atoll? These questions continue to echo through the years. And perhaps that is the true legacy of the Sarah Joe. Not simply a vanished boat. Not simply a maritime mystery. But a reminder that even in an age defined by information and technology, some stories remain incomplete. Some journeys disappear beyond the horizon. Some answers remain hidden beneath the passage of time. And some mysteries, carried by memory and sustained by uncertainty, continue to endure long after everyone expected them to fade away. There is a moment in every journey when land disappears from view. For most people, that moment is temporary. A ship moves farther from shore, the coastline fades into the distance, and eventually another destination appears. The horizon becomes not an ending but a transition. Travel continues. Life continues. The story moves forward. For the 5 men aboard the Sarah Joe, the horizon became something different. At some point on February 11th, 1979, somewhere beyond the sight of those waiting in Hannah, the familiar world fell away. The details of what happened next remain hidden within one of Hawaii's most enduring mysteries. Decades later, investigators, family members, maritime experts, and ordinary observers still find themselves staring toward that same invisible horizon, searching for answers that never fully emerged. Perhaps that is why the story continues to resonate so deeply. The Sarah Joe is not simply a mystery about a missing boat. It is a story about uncertainty. It is a story about absence. It is a story about the limits of what can be known. Throughout the years, countless efforts have been made to understand what happened. Search teams combed enormous sections of the Pacific. Experts analyzed weather patterns. Investigators examined available evidence. Researchers revisited the facts. Families held on to hope and memory. Each effort contributed something. None produced a complete explanation. The persistence of the mystery can feel frustrating, particularly in an era when answers are often expected. Modern technology has created an assumption that every question eventually yields to investigation. Satellites monitor oceans. Digital systems track vessels. Forensic techniques solve cases once thought impossible. Yet the Sarah Joe remains largely untouched by those advances. Not because people stopped trying. Not because the case was forgotten, but because the critical moments occurred in a place where evidence was scarce from the beginning. The Pacific Ocean is vast beyond ordinary comprehension. Maps can show its dimensions. Statistics can describe its size. Yet neither fully captures the reality of standing before an expanse of water that stretches beyond sight in every direction. The ocean does not preserve stories in the way cities do. There are no streets to retrace, no buildings to revisit, no permanent landmarks marking the path of a drifting vessel. When events unfold far from shore, evidence can disappear quickly and completely. The Sarah Joe illustrates this reality with unusual clarity. A boat vanished. Years later, it reappeared. The most important chapter between those two events remains missing. And yet, despite all the uncertainty, certain truths endure. The names endure. Ralph Maliakini, Scott Mormon, Benjamin Kalama, Patrick Wessner, Peter Hanchett. These names remain the foundation of the story. Without them, the mystery becomes merely an intellectual exercise. With them, it remains a human tragedy. Each name represents a life interrupted. Each name represents family, friendship, and memory. Each name reminds us that the story concerns people rather than theories. Over time, it can be tempting to focus entirely on the puzzle itself. How did the boat travel more than 2,000 miles? Who buried Scott Mormon? What became of the 4 men who were never found? These questions are important. They deserve attention. But the significance of the case extends beyond the answers people seek. The mystery matters because of the lives at its center. This perspective becomes especially important when considering the passage of time. More than 4 decades have passed since the disappearance. Entire generations have come and gone. Many people learning about the case today were not yet born when the Sarah Joe vanished. For them, the event exists entirely within history. Yet history is not the same thing as distance. Some stories remain emotionally immediate regardless of how much time has passed. The Sarah Joe is one of those stories. Perhaps that is because the central themes are universal. People understand friendship. People understand family. People understand uncertainty. Most importantly, people understand the desire for answers. The families connected to the Sarah Joe spent years living with questions that could not be resolved. Even after the discovery of the wreck in 1988, uncertainty remained. Even after the identification of Scott Mormon's remains, uncertainty remained. Even after decades of discussion and analysis, uncertainty remains today. That persistence gives the mystery a distinctive emotional weight. Many cases evolve over time as new evidence appears. The Sarah Joe remains largely unchanged. The facts known in 2026 are remarkably similar to those known after the wreck was discovered. The boat reached the Marshall Islands. Scott Mormon was buried on the atoll. The other 4 men remain missing. No official conclusion explains every aspect of the case. Those facts continue to define the mystery. The grave remains especially powerful within the narrative. More than any other piece of evidence, it captures the imagination. The image is simple. Coral stones. A driftwood cross. Human remains beneath them. Yet simplicity does not diminish significance. The grave suggests a story that investigators could never fully recover. Someone performed that burial. Someone stood on that remote atoll and marked a resting place. Someone created evidence of compassion or responsibility or remembrance. Then that person disappeared from the historical record. The grave is both an answer and a question. It confirms human action. It conceals human identity. As a result, it remains one of the most haunting elements of the entire case. There is also something profoundly symbolic about where the mystery ultimately settled. Not in a courtroom. Not in a police archive. Not within a solved investigative file. But on a remote atoll thousands of miles from where the journey began. The final known chapter of the Sarah Joe exists in one of the most isolated settings imaginable. A small wreck. A lonely grave. An immense ocean surrounding both. Few locations could better reflect the nature of the mystery itself. Isolation, distance, silence. And yet, despite those qualities, the story has never disappeared. People continue to remember. Researchers continue to revisit the evidence. Families continue to honor those who were lost. The mystery remains alive because memory remains alive. That may be the most meaningful legacy of all. Not the unanswered questions. Not the theories. Not even the remarkable discovery of the wreck. The true legacy lies in remembrance. The refusal to allow the 5 men to become forgotten. The refusal to let uncertainty erase their significance. The refusal to treat the story as merely another unsolved case. Because ultimately, the Sarah Jo is not defined by what vanished. It is defined by what remains. The names remain. The memories remain. The search for understanding remains. And so the story continues. Not as an active investigation generating constant breakthroughs. Not as a mystery on the verge of solution. But as a reminder. A reminder of the immense power of nature. A reminder of the limits of human knowledge. A reminder that some questions endure far longer than anyone expects. When the Sarah Jo left Hannah on that February morning in 1979, nobody aboard could have known that their journey would become part of Hawaiian history. Nobody could have imagined that decades later people would still discuss the disappearance, the wreck, the grave, and the unanswered questions. Yet that is exactly what happened. The voyage became a mystery. The mystery became a legacy. And the legacy continues. Somewhere beyond the certainty provided by evidence lies a final horizon that investigators have never crossed. Beyond that horizon rests the complete story of what happened after the last transmission, after the storm intensified, and after the boat disappeared from sight. Perhaps those answers still exist. Perhaps they were lost forever long ago. No one knows. What remains is the story itself. A fishing trip, a storm, a vanished boat, a wreck discovered nearly 10 years later, a solitary grave on a remote atoll, and 5 men whose final journey continues to stand as one of the most compelling and enduring maritime mysteries in the history of Hawaii.